Chapter 4258. When Gong Jie returned to China, it was already 1:00 in the morning. It was a full 10 hours of time difference, but he had already gotten used to it. The villa had a large private helipad specially reserved for helicopters. However, this helipad was very close to the villa. Gong Jie thought that if the helicopter landed directly on this helipad, the loud noise would definitely wake Natalia up. At this time, she might have already fallen asleep. Hence, he parked the helicopter at the helipad of another hotel and drove to the villa. Hua Jin was already asleep. In the middle of the night, his phone suddenly rang. He sat up in bed and picked up the phone beside his pillow. Only then did he realize that it was Gong Jie's number. He picked up the phone. Gong Jie's voice came from the other end. "You're asleep? If not, oh please. What time was it now?" It was already 1:00 in the morning. Why wouldn't he be asleep? "It's so late." "What's the matter?" Gong Jie said, "I'm here." "Where are you?" "I'm home." "Then why don't you just come up?" Hua Jin silently rolled his eyes. However, Gong Jie said awkwardly, "I'm lost." "Huh?" Hua Jin's eyes widened as if he had heard a fairy tale. "Lost?" "Yes, I came in from the back garden, but I got lost in the garden." When Hua Jin heard this, he couldn't help but feel cold. Indeed, the interior area of this villa was already astonishingly large. The complimentary garden area alone covered an area of more than 20 acres. In addition to the intricate garden structure and the lush shadows of the trees, Hua Jin had once lost his way in the garden. "How did you come in from the back garden?" "The garage is in the back garden." Gong Jie gradually lost his patience and his voice became deeper. "Come and pick me up." After that, he hung up the phone. Hua Jin let out a long sigh. Gong Jie had returned to visit Natalia. It seemed that, at least for the time being, he wouldn't be able to have a peaceful day. Hua Jin stood up, walked to the back door, and turned on the lights in the back garden in advance. He couldn't figure out the intricate route for a long time, but if the lights in the back garden were on, it would be of great help in finding the path. "Can you hear where my voice is coming from?" "I heard you." "Then do you see a huge stone sculpture here?" "I saw it." "Yes, just walk in this direction and you'll be able to walk out." The huge back garden was like a huge garden maze at night. If one was not careful, it would be easy to get lost. Hua Jin rarely came to the back garden. Natalia, on the other hand, liked to wander around the back garden. This place was almost her world. The swing, the garden, the stone sculptures, this place was her little world. Gong Jie, on the other hand, was an out-and-out clown. He actually got lost in the backyard. After a while, Hua Jin finally heard Gong Jie's footsteps gradually approaching. He looked in the direction of the footsteps. Through the layers of shadows of the trees, he finally caught a glimpse of Gong Jie's figure shuttling through the garden. Hua Jin immediately went up to him. "Here, this is the exit." He went over and unexpectedly bumped into Gong Jie, who was full of hostility. After searching the back garden for so long, his patience was basically exhausted. Chapter 4259. Hua Jin tried his best to hold back his laughter and pretended to be calm as he said, "This is the villa you bought." Gong Jie snorted when he heard that. The real estate consultant didn't say that this would be a backyard where people would get lost. He thought that he was going around in circles. No matter how he walked, it would be the same. In the end, he would definitely return to the starting point. If Hua Jin hadn't turned on the lights, he would have been searching here for an entire night. Hua Jin sighed. "Why did you come back so late?" "It takes more than 10 hours to fly from Hurricane to here. We also have to transfer to a helicopter." "Why?" "My plane can't land here. I don't have permission to land." With that, Gong Jie asked again, "What about Natalia? Is she asleep?" "Yes, she's asleep. It's already so late. She must have gone to bed long ago." "Oh." Gong Jie said, then I'll go up and take a look. Okay. Do you still remember which row and which room her room is in? Gong Jia was stumped by the question. In that case, it seemed that he really didn't remember. He had bought this villa for Hua Jin and Natalia. It had to be said that it was really big. Not only did it occupy a lot of space and a backyard, but the entire villa was also very big. It was like a century-old manor. It was said that this villa was the king of villas in this area. It was even more impressive than Yunshan Shi, which was under Mu Yaja's name. When Yun Shishir came to visit for the first time, she was very envious. She had never seen such a big villa before. Only someone as rich as Gong Jia could buy it with his eyes closed. He didn't feel anything at all. Gong Jia was used to living in big places. The land that the Gong family occupied could no longer be measured by square meters. It was a magnificent castle, and it was also a super mansion that was one of a kind in the world. Gong Jia and Hua Jin walked up the stairs one after another. Hua Jin led him to Natalia's room. After entering the room, he turned on the wall lamp. Gong Jia had just walked in when he smelled a fragrance. It was Natalia's natural fragrance. There was a faint fragrance on her body. It was hard to tell what it was, but it was especially refreshing. Gong Jia slowly walked into the room. His footsteps were very light as he was afraid of waking her up. When he walked to the bedside and saw the person sleeping soundly on the bed, his originally sharp eyebrows slightly relaxed. He gently sat down on the side of the bed. However, the moment he sat down, Natalia's eyelids suddenly fluttered, and she slowly woke up. She opened her eyes and focused her gaze on the man sitting on the side of the bed. When she recognized him, she was overjoyed all of a sudden. Daddy. Gong Jia was a little absent-minded when he saw that she was awake. Did I wake you up? No. Natalia pursed her lips and sat up on the bed. She opened her arms and softly snuggled into his arms and threw herself at him. Gong Jia hugged her with both hands, but Natalia's muffled voice came from his arms. Why did you come back so late? Hua Jin had told her that Gong Jia would be back soon. When Natalia found out that he would be back, she waited day after day, but he didn't come back. She couldn't help but feel a little disheartened. That night, she slept absent-mindedly. She was afraid that after she fell asleep, Gong Jia would return and she wouldn't be able to welcome him immediately. For a child, welcoming the return of a family member was a ritual. Chapter 4260. As she waited, she was so tired that she fell asleep in a daze. However, she didn't fall into a deep sleep. Thus, when Gong Jia came in and sat on the bed, she was startled awake. At that moment, she was like a little kitten, nestled in his arms. Gong Jia couldn't help but feel tender affection for her. The tedious matters of the past few days were instantly swept away and replaced by happiness. He hugged her and said gently, "Good girl, sleep early. It's already so late." "No. I want to hug you for a while longer." It felt like a century since she last saw him. Natalia was very introverted and rarely mentioned to Hua Jin that she missed Gong Jia. However, just because she didn't say it didn't mean that she didn't miss him. Gong Jia caressed her cheek gently and couldn't help but pinch it. "Have you been good at home?" "I've always been good. Mommy can testify." "Mommy?" Upon hearing this, Gong Jia widened his eyes in shock. Why did the little guy suddenly have a mommy for no reason when he wasn't around? At that moment, Hua Jin, who was standing by the door, heard Natalia's words. He blushed guiltily and cleared his throat awkwardly. Natalia acted as though she hadn't heard anything and hooked her finger at Gong Jia. Gong Jia obediently went over and heard her whisper, "He's mommy." She pointed at him with her finger. Seeing that she was pointing at him, Hua Jin guessed that she was whispering something. In a moment of panic, he said, "Hey, Natalia, don't talk nonsense." Gong Jia looked back meaningfully and sized him up with a deep gaze. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Mommy?" Hua Jin was speechless. "Heh, did you secretly change your sex when I wasn't around?" "No." Hua Jin muttered pitifully, she wanted to call me that. I can't argue with a child, right? I told her not to call me that in front of others. It's fine if she calls me that in private. Because I see that everyone else has a mommy. Why don't I have one? I don't have anyone else by my side. Besides, no matter whose mommy it is, she's not as pretty as my Hua Jin's mommy. Cough cough. Luckily, Hua Jin didn't drink any water. Otherwise, he would have choked on a big mouthful of water. Stop calling me that. Hua Jin emphasized it again and glared at her. Otherwise, I'll be laughed at. Natalia covered her mouth and snickered. When Hua Jin glared at her again, she meekly replied, "Got it." Even though she expressed her acknowledgement, she still had a smile on her face. What Hua Jin did not notice was that Gong Jia, who was beside him, could not help but curve his lips into a gentle smile. However, he deliberately turned his face away so that Hua Jin could not see the faint smile at the corner of his lips. "Stop fooling around," he grumbled. Between his words, his authority as a father was fully displayed. Natalia knew that Gong Jia wouldn't allow her to sleep late. She replied with a disappointed "oh," and went back to bed obediently. Gong Jia covered her with the blanket. Natalia asked carefully from under the blanket, "What's the weather like tomorrow?" Is it sunny?" Gong Jia turned to look at Hua Jin. "If I remember correctly, it should be sunny tomorrow." Chapter 4261. I want to fly a kite. Fly a kite? Gong Jia was a little surprised. When Hua Jin heard this, he immediately said, "I bought a strife kite some time ago. But recently, it has been cloudy. The weather changes all the time. If it's not raining, it's too cold. So, she has been waiting for the weather to clear up so that she can fly a kite." When Gong Jia heard this, he nodded. "Didn't you say that it's going to be sunny? Sleep early. After breakfast tomorrow, we'll fly a kite together." "Daddy, do you know how to fly a kite?" "No." "Ah, then you said that you'll take me to fly a kite. Don't you know how to fly?" Gong Jia curled his lips. "You can teach me. Daddy learns very quickly." "Okay. Then it's a promise. We'll fly a kite together. Don't go back on your word." "Okay, it's a promise." After getting his promise, Natalia fell asleep peacefully. Gong Jia and Hua Jin left the room. Hua Jin immediately said, "Shall I get you a bed? Where's the bathroom? I want to take a shower." "Go upstairs and turn left. It's the second room. That's my room. You can go and take a shower." As Hua Jin and Natalia were the only ones staying here, the other guest rooms did not have beds. Hua Jin wanted to go to the nanny's room and ask the nanny to make a bed, but Gong Jia had already gone upstairs to take a shower. "Get me a set of pajamas," he ordered him as if he was instructing a servant. Although Hua Jin was reluctant to do so, he agreed to it quickly. "Okay." Hua Jin nodded. So, while Gong Jia was in the bathroom, Hua Jin went to the walk-in closet and took out a brand new bathrobe and a new set of clothes. When he walked into the room, he said to Gong Jia through the bathroom door, "Can I leave the bathrobe outside? Is that okay?" Gong Jia's cold voice came from inside. "You want me to go out naked?" Hua Jin felt his face heat up just imagining that scene. "Forget it. Send him in." Hence, Hua Jin walked to the door and knocked. "Can I come in?" "I'll send it in for you." As soon as he finished speaking, the door opened from the inside. Hua Jin had thought that the Gong Jia would at most open a small gap, but in the end, it was opened wide, and the steam in the bathroom suddenly rushed out. He couldn't see clearly, so he waved his hand gently to disperse the fog. Suddenly, he saw Gong Jia standing at the door of the shower room, wiping his wet hair with a towel. His gaze uncontrollably swayed downwards, following the fine and distinct lines of the skin. His gaze followed the droplets of water that continued to slide downwards until he caught a glimpse of it. Suddenly, his eyes widened, and he didn't dare to look anymore. He abruptly turned around, as if he was sitting on a speeding roller coaster. His heart suddenly beat violently. Gong Jie noticed his big movement and frowned slightly. He turned around and saw Hua Jin's back facing him nervously. For a moment, he was confused. What was he doing? Clothes. Oh. Hua Jin was absent-minded. With his back facing him, he passed the bathrobe behind him. Gong Jie looked at his nervous expression, as if he was avoiding it. Then, he looked at his own naked body and seemed to understand something. Why? You're shy like a woman. Like a woman? Hua Jin couldn't help but frown. What did he mean by like a woman? Gong Jie asked again, you've never seen another man's body before? Chapter 42-62. Gong Jie raised his eyebrows disapprovingly. As he wiped his hair, he said to him as though he wanted to prove something, turn around. What? Hua Jin only felt that he was teasing him. Didn't you ask me to bring the bathrobe in? Now that I've brought it in, take it. I'm going out. Gong Jie heard this but deliberately didn't take it. Instead, he crossed his arms and looked at him calmly. Hua Jin's back was facing him. He didn't move at all, like a stone statue. Gong Jie was actually a little interested. Turn around. What? Hua Jin frowned and suddenly became vigilant. Are you a pervert? This guy was obviously not wearing any clothes, yet he still asked him to turn around and look at his nakedness. Was he a pervert? I asked you to turn around, didn't you hear me? His tone became a little dangerous. Hua Jin reluctantly turned around, but he deliberately squinted his eyes and carefully sized him up. Gong Jie was standing in the fog, so he couldn't see clearly for a moment. However, he imagined that he was not wearing any clothes, so Hua Jin deliberately didn't look down but stared straight at his face. Here. The fog gradually dispersed, and Hua Jin's face became even hotter. Just as he was about to turn his head and look away, he caught a glimpse of a towel wrapped around his lower body. Only then did he let out an embarrassed sigh. He thought he wasn't wearing anything. So he was wrapped in a towel. Damn it, he made him so nervous. He handed the bathrobe to him with both hands. Take it, your bathrobe. As though he could see his uneasiness, Gong Jie's eyes flashed with a hint of mockery. He didn't take the bathrobe but asked casually, where am I sleeping tonight? I'll tidy up a room for you later. It's so late, I'll sleep in this room. Hua Jin gritted his teeth. He guessed that this guy must be deliberately making things difficult for him, so he groaned. Fine, if you want to sleep, you can sleep in this room. I'll prepare another room. He didn't want to wait for Gong Jie to reach out and take it, so he directly stuffed the bathrobe into his arms. Just as he was about to turn around, Gong Jie suddenly grabbed his arm and pulled him back. Hua Jin did not expect that this guy would grab his arm. He was caught off guard and fell backwards. In his imagination, he should have fallen hard on the cold marble floor of the bathroom. When he finally stabilized his center of gravity, he suddenly realized that he had fallen on someone's chest. Gong Jie coldly glanced at the person in his arms who was getting more and more nervous. He snorted, is there a need to clean up the room? The bed is so big, let's sleep together. Perhaps it was because the temperature in the bathroom was too high or for some other reason. Hua Jin's face turned even redder, as if he was holding a mouthful of turbid air. You don't have to make do with it. Don't you always sleep alone? You don't have to squeeze into the same bed with me. When I went to Africa in the past, I always slept with 2 bodyguards. Gong Jie paused for a moment and said, besides, the bed in this room is so big, it won't be a problem for 2 people to sleep together. Hua Jin felt strange and couldn't help but ask, why do you have to sleep with me? Gong Jie heard that and laughed instead of answering. He lowered his head and leaned closer to him. He lowered his voice and looked at him flirtatiously. I find it strange too. Why are you deliberately avoiding me? Hua Jin was stunned. You. Chapter 42-63. You, what are you hiding from? The evening breeze gently blew past the window and through the crack in the door, brushing against the back of his neck. On his face, the steam in the bathroom and the hot air he exhaled as he spoke, one fire and one ice. It was like two worlds of ice and fire. Hua Jin couldn't help but feel his skin shiver. It was as if countless cold cicadas were seeping out of his pores, giving him goosebumps. He didn't dare to look into his eyes. He had a feeling that his eyes were so deep and contained countless meanings. What are you hiding from? Seeing his reaction, Gong Jia felt even more puzzled. He got closer to him, as if deliberately provoking him. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "Have you never seen a man's body?" "What do you mean?" "Otherwise." Gong Jia lowered his head to look at himself, then looked at him. "Why are you so sensitive?" Those who don't know would think that you like me." As soon as he said this, Hua Jin pushed him away violently. "You'd better not say such things." Gong Jia was surprised by his resistance. In front of him, Hua Jin had been suppressing his anger, not daring to say anything. From the time they first met to the time they slowly got to know each other, Hua Jin's attitude towards him had always been one of fear and avoidance. Even if he was angry, he didn't dare to say it out loud. It was as if he was afraid of him. This was the first time he had resisted him and hit him. Gong Jia couldn't help but be interested. He gritted his teeth and said, "Are pranks fun?" "Pranks? Do you like to play pranks on others so much? Just because you're the crown prince of the Gong family, you can act high and mighty and not care about other people's feelings? I don't like it when you play pranks on me. Please don't do it in the future." Hua Jin seemed to have lost his temper. In front of Gong Jia, such resistance was nothing compared to a cat's scratch. He didn't care about it at all. However, this was already Hua Jin's greatest resistance. However, the way he lost his temper didn't seem that dazzling. Although he had tried his best to use a stiff tone, in Gong Jia's eyes, it was insignificant. However, the more he acted this way, the more guilty he was. Gong Jia enjoyed the man's anger without restraint. His thin lips curled up slightly as he crossed his arms arrogantly in front of his chest. Unlike his angry reaction, he was extremely calm and even had a hint of mockery. "When you're angry, you look guilty." Hua Jin was momentarily at a loss for words. He could only stare at him, flabbergasted. "That's right." He suddenly, as if he had woken up from a dream. Why was he so angry? Why was he so angry? From an outsider's point of view, there was indeed an inexplicable sense of guilt. However, why was he guilty when he said those words? It was just giving him a bathrobe. Why was he so evasive? It was as if he was afraid of looking at his body. Hua Jin furrowed his brows. Even he felt that his reaction was strange. "Do you like women or men?" Gong Jia threw out a sudden question when he was at his most absent-minded. Hua Jin, who was in a daze, didn't even have time to react. He instinctively replied, "I don't know." Chapter 42-64. Hua Jin, who was in a daze, didn't even have time to react before he instinctively replied, "I don't know." As soon as he said that, not only Gong Jia, but even he himself was stunned. His mind was in a mess, and the way Gong Jia looked at him changed slightly, as if he was scrutinizing him. After being stunned for a long time, Gong Jia suddenly laughed and said in a helpless tone, "Do you like men or women? How come you don't even know?" Hua Jin pursed his lips and turned his face to the side. He didn't understand what was wrong with him either. He should have answered women without hesitation, but he actually hesitated. Gong Jia seemed to have an inquisitive attitude as he lowered his head slightly and inched closer to him. At that moment, the two people's lips were very close. Hua Jin looked up slightly and could see Gong Jia's mesmerizing eyelashes. Those damn eyelashes. They were so long and so close to his eyes that his vision was a little out of focus. Gong Jia was especially tall and slender. He was like a wall that blocked him in the corner. His tall figure cast a shadow over his body. That shadow seemed to contain 1,000 pounds of strength, pressing down on him until he almost couldn't breathe. Hua Jin gripped the bathrobe in his hands. His knuckles were white, and the collar of the bathrobe was almost twisted out of shape. Because of Gong Jie's immense aura, he felt like he couldn't breathe. Gong Jie looked at him from the side. Seeing how nervous he was, his eyes flashed and he suddenly straightened his back. "Why are you so nervous?" As he said that, he curled his lips and took the bathrobe from Hua Jin's hands. He draped it over his body, tied a knot around his waist, and left the bathroom. Hua Jin, who was behind him, seemed to have lost all his strength. He straightened his body and barely managed to stand. Leaning against the wall, he walked out and saw that Gong Jie had already walked to the wine cabinet. He casually picked up a bottle of wine and poured himself a glass. Hua Jin immediately stood up awkwardly and tried to maintain his calm appearance. Gong Jie held the wine glass and gently swirled the red wine inside before taking a sip. He looked at him silently. Not knowing why, Hua Jin thought of a leopard ready to hunt from his gaze and couldn't help but shudder. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. His gaze was so piercing that it made his hair stand. Hence, he hurriedly said, You'll sleep here tonight." As he said that, he turned around and left the room in a sorry state. Gong Jie stared meaningfully at his departing back as he put down his goblet, his eyes regaining their usual frostiness. He went into the guest room. Hua Jin made the bed in one go. By this time, the nanny and servants were already asleep, and he did not want to wake them up. Hence, he made the bed himself. It was only after he made the bed and went to bed that he realized that the silk blanket was a little thin. However, he could not be bothered to rummage through it, so he curled his body up to ward off the cold. However, even though he was tired, he didn't feel sleepy lying on the bed. Hua Jin tossed and turned on the bed, but he couldn't fall asleep. The night became unusually unbearable. For Yun Shusher, it was also an unbearable night. Chapter 4265. She had already asked the doctor several times to confirm that there were no major problems. It was just a symbolic observation period, so she had to be more careful. Yun Shusher did not dare to sleep either. She was afraid that if she slept too deeply, there would be no one to take care of Gong Fan when he woke up. Actually, she knew that she did not sleep deeply, but she could not fall asleep either. Her mind was filled with Gong Fan's disappointed and lonely gaze. He was so lonely that he was like a person trapped on an isolated island. Previously, she was still puzzled as to why he had suddenly become so cold. Now, she realized in annoyance that it was probably as Mu Yaja had said. Perhaps, he had accidentally heard her conversation with Mu Yaja last night. Yun Shusher was filled with regret. Even though she had already thought about what she had said back then, she started to regret it again as she looked at the sleeping face. Gong Fan was also her child. Why did she give up just like that? But on second thought, she did not want to use Yu as a stake after all. If she was the one blocking the way, she would be willing to take a gamble regardless of the cost. However, if it was Yu, she was worried that she would not be able to afford to lose. She did not dare to take the risk. The ward was very big. Even though it was almost spring and it was difficult to find a ward for the changing season, Mu Yaja still tried his best to negotiate and finally settled on a luxurious ward. There were 2 rooms and 1 living room. Mu Yaja and Xiao Yichen slept in the other room. Initially, Mu Yaja said that he would stay behind to accompany them. When they were tired, they could just rest on the sofa for a while. He let Yun Shusher and Xiao Yichen sleep in the other room. However, Yun Shusher could not fall asleep. Even if she was sleepy, she had a lot on her mind and refused to sleep. Mu Yaja knew what was on her mind. He also knew that she wanted to make use of every inch of time to accompany Gong Fan, so he did not say anything. He reminded her to wake him up if she was tired. He would take care of her and let her sleep. Yun Shusher agreed verbally, but how could she really bear to sleep by herself? She couldn't sleep well. Yu used to be a thorn in her heart. Ever since he was born, his physique had been poor and his body was weak. She had been trying her best to nourish his body. It had not been easy for his body to recover, but now, his illness had increased. Another worry for Gong Fan. Beside Gong Fan's bed, there was an accompanying bed. When it was folded, it was a chair. When it was unfolded, it was a single bed. She lay on the single bed, but from time to time, she would sit up and look at Gong Fan's face. She looked again and again, and as she looked, she unconsciously began to cry. She felt that she really didn't deserve to be a good mother. Back then, Xiao Yichen had once told Yu Yu that he envied Yu Yu for having mommy by his side since he was young. However, Yun Shishir was upset that she had kept Yu Yu by her side out of selfishness. If he had been able to control his condition when he was young, he might not have ended up like this. Perhaps, if Yu Yu had stayed by Mu Yaja's side at that time, he wouldn't have developed a dual personality because of those dark and bullied memories of his childhood. However, how could there be medicine for regret in this world? No matter how much she regretted it now, it was useless. Yun Shishir could no longer sleep. She sat by the bed and carefully held Gong Fan's right hand. His originally thin arm had become swollen because of the foredrip just now. A gentle pinch would create a dent that would not recover for a long time. His entire arm, including the back of his hand, was unbelievably cold. Chapter 42-66. His hand was really cold. It was probably because he had just finished the 2 bottles of foredrip, so the temperature was frighteningly low. She placed the back of his hand on her cheek pitifully, trying to warm his hand with the warmth of her skin. Gong Fan's fingers curled up slightly in his faint state. She thought that he had woken up and immediately went over anxiously. However, he still didn't move. His eyes were tightly shut, and there were no signs of him waking up. Yun Shishir's eyes fell in disappointment. How could she forget that the doctor said that the foredrip had a calming component? Hence, he wouldn't wake up for a while. He would probably be unconscious until tomorrow afternoon and could only rely on the foredrip to maintain his consciousness. Yun Shishir leaned over and kissed his forehead gently. She choked and said, "Gong Fan, do you know? If there's really a conditional exchange in this world, I'm willing to use my life in exchange for you and Yu's safety. You're very important to me. I really don't want to let go of your hand." She pursed her lips and raised her head, forcing her tears back. She couldn't cry anymore. If it was early in the morning, Mu Yaja and Xiao Yichen would be worried if they saw her red eyes. Yun Shishir leaned against the back of his hand and quietly stared at his sleeping face. The next day, Hua Jin was woken up by the cold. The morning breeze was the coldest. Even though the windows were tightly shut, the slightly chilly morning breeze made the entire room seem like it was covered in a layer of frost. Even though it was already the spring equinox, the weather was still as cold and hot as before. It might still be autumn in the morning, but it would be midsummer in the afternoon. At night, it might be midwinter. Hence, in such weather, Hua Jin always wore a thick coat when he went out. When the weather was hot, he would take off his coat. When it was cold, he would put it on again. However, he was obviously careless. The thin blanket and the cold morning forced him to wake up. When he woke up, his limbs seemed to have stiffened and he couldn't help but tremble. He sat up in bed and sneezed several times. He sniffed and realized that he had caught a cold. He rubbed his forehead with a headache. She could still get used to the temperature at night, but she didn't expect to get frostbite in the morning. Her clothes were in the master bedroom. She did not know if Gong Jia had woken up yet. According to Yun Shishir, ever since he was young, Gong Jia always had a bad morning temper. She wondered if he would be shocked out of the door by the Demon King's morning temper if he risked his life to sneak into the bedroom to get some clothes to wear. Just the thought of it was terrifying. Last night, he had fallen asleep in a daze while his thoughts were running wild. When he woke up, he was in a daze for a short while. Then, he thought of Gong Jia's strange words and actions last night, which made him very annoyed. Hua Jin lazily laid down on the bed and rolled up the blanket. Just like that, he pitifully restrained himself under the blanket. He rubbed his left foot against the back of his foot, trying to use the most primitive method of rubbing to generate heat. Damn it, the blanket was made of silk. She couldn't warm up the blanket and sheets for an entire night. Her toes were almost numb from the cold. Hua Jin's face was full of resentment. He was ashamed that he had felt warm when Gong Jie rushed back to the country because of Natalia's words. Now, he was the one who was suffering. Why did he have to invite this demon king back? Wasn't he just looking for trouble? Chapter 42-67. Just like that, Hua Jin drifted back to sleep. In his half-awake state, he felt that someone had entered the room. Even though he wasn't in a deep sleep, he was so sleepy that he couldn't open his eyes. In a daze, he felt that someone had gently covered him with a thick blanket. Then, that person left the room quietly. When he woke up, the sun was already shining brightly outside the window. Hua Jin sat up on the bed and felt that his body was a little heavy. When he looked up, he realized that there was really a blanket covering his body. Recalling what had happened in his days, he thought that it was just a dream. He didn't expect that it was real. Then, who could have covered him with a blanket? Hua Jin's heart was filled with doubts and he couldn't figure out what was going on. He lifted the blanket and got out of bed. He shuffled to the door in his slippers and saw the servant, Auntie Gui, cleaning the room. When he saw her, he guessed that Auntie Gui must have seen him sleeping here when she was cleaning the room. She was afraid that he would catch a cold, so she added a blanket for him. "Good morning, Auntie Gui." Hua Jin smiled and greeted her. Auntie Gui looked up. When she saw him, she was slightly surprised. Young master, why are you sleeping in this room?" Only then did she realize that she had committed a huge taboo by cleaning the door of the room he was sleeping in. As a servant, when the master was resting, they wouldn't step within 10 meters of him unless he had already woken up. Only then would they enter the floor where they were resting to clean. Hua Jin was startled. He thought that Auntie Gui had added a blanket for him when she was cleaning the room. Why, wasn't it her? Auntie Gui saw that he was startled and asked carefully, "I didn't know that you were sleeping in this room. Did I wake you up?" "Oh, no." Hua Jin turned his head and looked around. He asked tentatively, "Did someone enter this room just now?" Auntie Gui looked around and shook her head in confusion. "No, I didn't see anyone. I just came up." "What the hell?" Hua Jin muttered. Auntie Gui didn't hear him clearly. She looked at him with a puzzled expression, as if waiting for his instructions. Hua Jin smiled. "It's nothing. You go ahead." "Yes. By the way, young Master Gong and young Miss are already downstairs." "Are they up yet?" "Yes, I woke up long ago." Young Miss woke up early in the morning. For some reason, she was especially excited today. She said that you guys agreed to fly a kite today. She said that she couldn't sleep, so she went to the back garden to play for a while. Then, seeing that you guys weren't up for a long time, she went upstairs to wake young Master Gong up. Auntie Gui reported Natalia's situation to Hua Jin as usual. Hua Jin nodded. "Got it." As he spoke, he held on to the escalator and went downstairs. When he arrived downstairs, he saw Natalia choosing a kite. Hua Jin had bought many kites a while ago. Natalia liked many different styles, but she couldn't pick her favorite. Regardless of which style she liked, she didn't like any of them. Hua Jin thought that since kites weren't expensive anyway, he might as well buy all of them. He bought a total of 5 kites, and Gong Jie and Natalia were in the midst of choosing one. "How about we fly this today?" Gong Jie picked up a kite. It had a design of Dubai on it. Chapter 42-68. Seeing this, Natalia's eyes widened. She pouted and said, "I want to play this." As she spoke, she raised the Peppa Pig kite high up in the air and even imitated Peppa Pig's squeak. Gong Jie did not know whether to laugh or cry at her imitation of a pig's squeak. "Who did you learn this from?" "Peppa Pig." "Peppa Pig?" Gong Jie paused for a moment and asked, "Who is Peppa Pig?" "That's her." Natalia raised the Peppa Pig kite high up in front of her and said with a smile, "That's her." A pig's face that looked like a hairdryer enlarged in front of Gong Jie's eyes. Peppa Pig was a children's cartoon. It was a children's cartoon that had a positive outlook on life and was very childlike. Hua Jin found out that Natalia liked cute cartoon characters, so he found this cartoon. In the beginning, Hua Jin accompanied Natalia to watch the movie. Since she enjoyed watching the movie, he decided to accompany her and watch the movie as well. In the end, as he watched, Hua Jin was also mesmerized. "Who did you learn this squeak from?" Gong Jia paused for a moment and said seriously, "It's not ladylike to imitate a pig's squeak." "Humph, I learned it from Dad Jin." Natalia betrayed Hua Jin without hesitation. Hua Jin was standing behind the two of them and eavesdropping. When he heard Natalia betraying him, Hua Jin felt embarrassed and cleared his throat. Natalia and Gong Jia turned around. When she saw him, Natalia pursed her lips and smiled. "Why are you up so late, lazy pig?" For some reason, when Hua Jin saw Gong Jia, he was reminded of the awkward scene last night. He felt uneasy and did not know where to put his hands. Gong Jia turned his head around again and scrutinized Peppa Pig's kite carefully. Natalia ran over and threw herself into Hua Jin's arms. She smiled and said, "He asked me who I learned how to squeak from, so I told him the truth." "Because you told me that a lady can't lie, right?" Hua Jin bit the bullet and nodded. "You promised me." Natalia looked up at him expectantly. "We'll fly a kite together in the afternoon." "Are you choosing kites?" "Yes." "What are you going to fly?" Gong Jia suddenly said, "How about 2 kites?" "2? "Yes, I'll fly one with Natalia and you fly one." When Natalia heard this, she thought that it was a good idea. Okay, 2. Hua Jin replied, "But I don't know how to fly a kite." "Learn." Hua Jin did not say anything else. In the end, Natalia picked 2 kites. One was her favorite Peppa Pig and the other was Hua Jin's favorite to buy. Gong Jia liked the eagle-shaped kite. However, he did not like it so much that he wanted to fly it. He realized that Hua Jin seemed to still be a child at heart. Perhaps it was because of the lack of childhood that he sometimes showed a very childish side to him. When he saw his favorite toys, cartoons, or cartoon dolls, he would love them so much that he could not put them down. Chapter 42-69. He did not like dolls, so he swept the doll off the bed with a sweep of his hand. However, just as the lights were about to go out, Gong Jia suddenly thought of something. He raised his eyebrows as he looked at the lonely little pig rolling on the edge of the bed. He felt that it was a little pitiful, like an abandoned orphan. Hence, he picked it up and put it back on the bed. Peppa Pig was a family of 4, and the one on Hua Jin's bed was George. The iconic little dinosaur had become very recognizable. Gong Jia held the doll and looked at it carefully. There was a faint fragrance on it. It was Hua Jin's scent. Hua Jin did not have the habit of wearing perfume, but he liked to apply body lotion after bathing. Gong Jia could smell that it was Shouldn's body lotion. It was fragrant and not overpowering, but it was very comfortable to smell. The entire blanket was filled with Hua Jin's scent. This meant that he liked to sleep with this little pig in his arms. Gong Jia could not help but be surprised. He did not expect this fellow to sleep with a doll in his arms like a child. After lunch, the 3 of them went out. Initially, the nanny wanted to go with them so that she could take care of Natalia. However, Gong Jia said that it was not necessary. He ordered 2 bodyguards to follow them and they set off. In the morning, Hua Jin instructed the butler to go out and buy fabric for the picnic to cover the lawn. He also bought some snacks while he was at it. Natalia had been looking forward to a sunny day when they could go to the park to set up a barbecue grill. Gong Jia promised to take her there when he was free. On the way, Hua Jin suddenly thought of something and asked, "Since we're going to fly a kite, why don't we ask you and Xiao Yichen to come along?" Gong Jia's face twitched when he heard this. "No need." "Huh? Why? Didn't he usually dote on his 2 nephews? Since they were going to fly a kite, wouldn't it be more interesting to bring you and Xiao Yichen along?" However, Gong Jia didn't think so. He could only imagine the two little fellows snickering at him and whispering to each other, "I didn't expect that uncle would still play with such childish things even though he's already an adult." That's right, flying a kite is so childish. As expected of the chief commander of the hurricane group. The commander in charge of kiting? Ha 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 ha. The thought of those two infuriating faces infuriated Gong Jie. There's no need to specially bring those two little fellows. There will be another chance next time. He didn't want to be mocked by these two brats. Noticing the awkwardness on Gong Jie's face, Hua Jin actually guessed what he was worried about. He probed half-jokingly, "Don't tell me that you're too burdened with the image of an idol, so you're worried that the two lads will laugh at you if they see you flying a kite and you fail." His words exposed the truth. Gong Jie coldly glared at Hua Jin. The temperature in the car dropped by a few degrees Celsius. The latter immediately shut his mouth and didn't dare to say another word. He was worried that he would upset the big devil and lose his temper on the spot. After thinking about it, he felt that he had to explain himself. "Actually, I don't think it's a big deal to fly a kite with the children. When you have a son or daughter in the future, you might even have to do homework and do handicrafts with them. Isn't that even more childish?" Natalia, who was beside him, was stunned. Chapter 4270. Just as Hua Jin had said, there would be a day sooner or later when the Gong Jie would fall in love with a woman. Then, the two of them would get married and have a child. That child would have the blood of the Gong Jie flowing in his veins. He would be her biological child. But she wasn't. If there was such a day, then, would that child replace her and receive all the love and affection of the Gong Jie? But it was nothing. Suddenly, Natalia was a little envious of that child. Even though the child wasn't born yet and only existed in an abstract sense, just thinking about it made her feel envious. She thought that the child of the Gong Jie must be the luckiest child in the world. She had such a handsome father who loved her so much. She was afraid that she would never have such a bond of blood in her life again. Thinking of this, Natalia's gaze suddenly looked a little lonely. When Hua Jin looked at her, she immediately curled her lips and smiled to hide it. Hua Jin was a meticulous person. Through Natalia's smile, he could see her loneliness and disappointment. He immediately realized that his words just now had probably caused her to have some bad associations. She probably thought that one day, when the Gong Jie really fell in love with a wife, got married, and had a child, he would definitely give all his love to the child and not to her. But if Natalia didn't say it, he couldn't say it either. Otherwise, it would be too deliberate. Just as he was feeling conflicted, Natalia looked at Hua Jin curiously and asked, "Will you get married in the future?" You will definitely find a woman you like in the future and get married. Then, like Daddy, you will get married and have a child, right? When Hua Jin heard this, he immediately confirmed his guess. Just as expected. She was really worried about this. "I won't get married." Hua Jin chuckled and immediately said, "I won't get married." She had been mentally prepared for Hua Jin to say that he would get married, but when she heard such an answer from him, Natalia was even more surprised. "Why?" "Because," Hua Jin said seriously, "I don't want to get married." "Why not?" "Because I already have you." Natalia didn't expect such an answer from him. She was stunned and looked at him in surprise. "Do you plan to spend the rest of your life alone?" To die alone, he was not destined to be alone for the rest of his life. "What do you mean by dying alone? Don't I already have you?" Hua Jin patted her head lovingly. "In the future, no matter what happens, you and I will be together forever. We will never be separated." When Natalia heard this, her heart was deeply touched. Her eyes reddened, but she held back her tears and nodded heavily. "Yes. I will study hard and earn money in the future to support you in your old age." Perhaps for Natalia, not getting married for the rest of her life was not a clear concept, but it was enough to shock her. However, retirement, Hua Jin immediately imagined himself paralyzed in a wheelchair while Natalia was all grown up and busy beside him. Oh my God. This little rascal, he hadn't even grown up yet, but he could already imagine what she would look like when she was old. Was this filial piety? Should he symbolically feel touched? Chapter 42-71. Natalia threw herself into his arms and said seriously, "I've decided to love you more from now on. After all, you're the man who's going to be with me for the rest of my life." When Hua Jin heard this, he was overjoyed. Although he pretended to be calm on the surface, the corners of his mouth couldn't hide his delight. "You've finally realized the truth." Hua Jin hugged Natalia lovingly and raised his handsome eyebrows. "I'm the man who's going to be with you for the rest of your life." When Gong Jie heard this, he didn't think much of it and said unhappily, "Why should I?" Natalia and Hua Jin looked back at him in surprise. "You didn't even ask me. How do you know that I'll definitely get married and have children in the future?" When Natalia heard this, she didn't quite believe him. "Don't tell me you don't want to get married and have children?" "I don't have such thoughts." "Why?" Natalia suddenly threw out a shocking sentence. "Don't tell me you like men?" Gong Jia was speechless. Hua Jin was speechless. After Natalia asked this question, before Gong Jia could react, Hua Jin's face turned red. He immediately muttered, "Don't talk nonsense." Gong Jia glanced at Hua Jin meaningfully and couldn't help but laugh. "Why are you blushing?" Hua Jin instinctively touched his face and looked at the phone screen. "Is my face red?" When he turned around, he saw Natalia nodding sincerely. "Yeah, it's very red." Hua Jin immediately found an excuse. "It's probably because the sun outside is too strong. It's red." Then, there was dead silence in the car. The car drove towards the outskirts. Half an hour later, the car arrived at Forest Park on Stone Horse Mountain. Outside Forest Ridge Park, there was a large lawn. On weekends and holidays, many people would bring their children and call their friends over to fly kites. However, coincidentally, it wasn't a weekend or a holiday. Instead of the busy holiday season, there were only a few kites on the lawn. The bodyguard got out of the car and stood by. Hua Jin carried the basket of snacks to a spacious lawn and laid out the tablecloth on the lawn. The fruits were all washed. Hua Jin took Natalia's favorite snacks and placed them casually on the lawn. However, when Natalia reached the lawn, she was unusually excited. She looked around and ran around to check the area. When she came back, she reported to Gong Jia that she had found a suitable place to fly kites. There are more people there. Everyone is standing there to fly kites." Gong Jia nodded. He picked up the kite that Hua Jin had arranged and was about to walk over with Natalia. When Hua Jin saw this, he immediately stood up and said, "No, don't fly it in a crowded place." "Huh? Why?" "Because if there are too many people, the kites will be too close together and the strings will get tangled. If that happens, the kite will fall easily and the string will be knotted." This time, he only brought 3 reels of string. If it was to be knotted, he didn't have many spare ones. As he spoke, a kite fell and landed on Hua Jin's back. The two of them ran over noisily. The string got tangled. Chapter 42-72. Hua Jin turned to Natalia and Gong Jia with an expression that seemed to say, "See, I'm right." Natalia nodded with a confused expression. "You seem to know a lot. Didn't you say you didn't fly kites before?" "I didn't fly kites, but I did a lot of research." Hua Jin had done a lot of research. He usually didn't fly kites. Furthermore, it was rare for him to go out with Natalia, so he didn't want to fail. Thus, Natalia and Gong Jia chose a more spacious area that was far away from the dense cluster of kites. Although there weren't many people at this time, the people who came to fly kites were all gathered together. Therefore, that part of the sky was filled with a dazzling array of kites of various colors and styles. They were all gathered together in a dark mass. The spectacular scene was breathtaking. "Daddy, let's go fly kites." "Okay." Gong Jia picked up 2 kites. "Which one should we fly first?" Natalia stared at the 2 kites in Gong Jia's hands. One was Peppa Pig, and the other was Dubai. After hesitating for a long time, she chose Dubai first. Let's fly this one first. Gong Jia and Hua Jin were both surprised. Huh? Why Dubai? Don't you like Peppa Pig the most? I'll use Dubai as a practice target. If I don't fly it properly and it flies away, I still have Peppa Pig. Natalia was quite selfish. Hua Jin was full of resentment. Dubai was his favorite kite. However, Hua Jin still chose to compromise in front of his precious daughter. Don't worry, I'll take good care of Dubai. Saying this, Natalia picked up Dubai's kite and ran toward a spacious area. Slow down. Gong Jia chased after her. Do you know how to fly it? I do. Saying this, Natalia ran off into the distance. Hua Jin smiled helplessly and stayed where he was, guarding the luggage. Natalia didn't know how to fly a kite, but she was very competitive. Gong Jia had said that he would teach her, but Natalia had mercilessly exposed him. You won't release it either, right? I've seen others fly kites. I know how to do it. Saying this, Natalia raised Dubai high up in the air, and her two little legs began to run like a motor. However, the way she was flying the kite was a little inappropriate. Today's weather was very good. It was sunny and there was nothing on the lawn, so the wind was very strong. Natalia's method was usually used when there was no wind. She ran and created wind to blow the kite up. But now that there was wind, her method was not suitable. When she ran, the kite was about to fly up in the wind. She was not tall and thin, so in the blink of an eye, she was hung on the ground by the wind. Wah! Natalia got to her feet and pouted with a long face. Seeing that she had fallen, Gong Jia hurriedly ran over to her side and squatted down nervously. How are you feeling? Does it hurt? A little, let me see. Gong Jia carefully held up her knees. He saw that her knees were red from the friction on the lawn and a layer of skin had been scraped off. Does it hurt? Natalia replied softly, It doesn't hurt. It's just burning. It's a little scraped off, but there's no blood. Chapter 4273. Gong Jia blew on her knuckles and glared at her. I told you I was going to teach you. You didn't want to listen, huh? She insisted on being stubborn. Now that she had fallen, she insisted that it didn't hurt. Although there was no blood, it was still a layer of skin. She wasn't made of steel. How could it not hurt? His heart ached for her. I'm really fine. I can still walk. As she spoke, Natalia climbed up from the ground. Although her knee was burning with pain, she could endure it. How could she show any pain? Otherwise, Gong Jia would definitely let her rest for a while and not let her fly the kite anymore. The kite hadn't been flown yet. She didn't want to rest. Do you want to continue? Of course. Natalia reached out to pick up the kite, but Gong Jia picked it up first. You're not allowed to touch it. Natalia looked at him suspiciously. I'll teach you how to fly the kite first. Then, you can fly your page, okay? Okay. Although she was unwilling, Natalia nodded in agreement. She was feeling excited at this moment, but she could only watch helplessly from the side. She was a little indignant, but the man could also sense her impatience, so he said, Watch carefully. Let's see who will put it higher later. It had to be said that the man's words had ignited Natalia's fighting spirit. Although Natalia was a little girl, she had a strong desire to win. When she heard that they were going to compete to see who could fly higher, she was instantly energized and filled with fighting spirit. Gong Jia picked up the kite. As he was tall, when he lifted the kite, the wind blew the kite up. He threw the kite like a paper airplane. Then, he let go of the reel and took a step back, gently tugging on the reel from time to time. The wind blew the kite higher and higher. Although Gong Jia didn't have the skills to fly a kite, he thought that the kite would probably fly as far as a paper airplane. He had studied engineering, so a game like kite flying was child's play to him. The kite took off smoothly. In his hands, it was as obedient as an old eagle that had undergone strict training. He knew how to use the wind very well. If the kite showed signs of weakness in the air, he would tighten the reel and give it a gentle pull. If he felt that the string was starting to tighten, it meant that the wind was blowing. Thus, when the wind came, he let go of the string and let the wind blow the kite higher and higher. Unknowingly, the reel had loosened by half, and the kite was flying higher and higher. Even with the naked eye, it seemed to have surpassed all the other kites on the lawn. Why are those kites not as high as you? Natalia's eyes sparkled. Daddy, you're amazing. Hua Jin suddenly walked over and overheard their conversation. He said disapprovingly, their line isn't as long as ours. Their line has already reached the bottom. Look at the height, it's no more than 400 meters. The line I brought can reach up to 800 meters. 800 meters. Well, actually, the kite string is 1,000 meters long, but any higher and the kite string will break easily. Natalia nodded, half understanding. Oh, I get it. So our kite is over 400 meters now, right? There's a mark on the line. Chapter 4274. Hua Jin walked over to take a closer look. There was a tick mark on the line, indicating that the kite had already flown up to 500 meters. How much effort had it taken to successfully fly the kite up to 500 meters? He claimed that he had no kite flying experience. Who was he kidding? It's fun. Gong Jia suddenly felt that kite flying was quite interesting, especially when he caught a glimpse of Natalia, who was beside him, looking at him with admiration. This made him feel that this activity could not be more interesting. Natalia felt a little guilty. Just now, she had been eyeing Gong Jia covetously, determined to compete with him. Now, seeing him fly so high, she suddenly felt a little discouraged. I lost. She said angrily, I definitely can't win against Daddy. When Gong Jia heard this, he smiled disapprovingly. You're giving up just like that? When she heard that, Natalia immediately retorted stubbornly, who said that I'm giving up? I haven't said that I'm giving up yet. Hua Jin immediately said, Natalia, let's go fly Peppa Pig, okay? Okay. Natalia clenched her little fists. I must fly higher than Daddy. Okay. You're not allowed to help. I want to fly it myself. Okay. Hua Jin smiled as he watched Natalia walk to the makeup table. She grabbed the kite and string from Peppa Pig and studied it for a while. Finally, she returned to Hua Jin's side dejectedly. How do I tie the kite string? Didn't she say that she would do it herself and that she did not need help? Hua Jin gave her a look of disdain. Natalia could not ignore the ridicule in his eyes. She immediately defended herself seriously. Tying the string. It's just tying the string. It's not considered helping. Oh, right. If you say it's not counted, then it's not counted. Hua Jin did not know whether to laugh or cry. He squatted down and placed the kite on the ground. He threaded the string back and forth with both hands and quickly tied the string. Gong Jia watched the entire process and suddenly smiled. I couldn't tell that you're quite clever with your hands. I was the one who tied your kite. You're really amazing, he said casually. It was unknown if he was sincerely praising her. Hua Jin felt uncomfortable listening to it. He fixed the string and handed the kite to Natalia. He patted her head gently. Go. Yes. Natalia lifted the kite and flew it in the same way her brother had done earlier. Alas, she was short, which was quite a disadvantage. No matter how she tiptoed, there was still a height difference between her and her brother. She turned to Hua Jin and said, stand a little to the side. Don't block my wind. Hua Jin had a face full of question marks. How could he block her attack with his body? However, he still obediently retreated to the side. Natalia threw the kite, but it crashed into the grass like a plane. Duong. Natalia's face darkened immediately. She looked resentfully at the kite in Gong Jia's hand that was flying higher and higher. She complained, "We're different." Ha 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 ha. Hua Jin could not hold it in anymore. He was not afraid of offending Natalia and laughed mercilessly. "Natalia, you're too cute. You didn't throw the kite on the ground. You threw it into the wind." Natalia's face continued to darken. "Stop laughing." Hua Jin tried his best to hold it in. His face was red from holding it in. "Let me help you, okay?" Chapter 4275. "Alright, you play by yourself." Hua Jin saw that Natalia insisted on playing by herself, so he walked to the side and sat on the ground. He watched as Natalia ran around with the kite in her hand. The kite in Gong Jie's hand was already very high, and it was getting higher and higher. Coupled with the cute design of the kite and the exquisite workmanship, it attracted the attention of the other kite flyers on the lawn. "Dad, look! That kite is so high. Brother, I want to fly it that high too." "No, we have reached the end of the rope. This is the highest we can fly." "Then how can he fly his kite so high?" "That means he bought the rope for a long time. That Dubai is so cute. Why is our kite so ugly? If there was no comparison, there would be no harm. As the saying goes, you get what you pay for." This saying was not wrong. Other people's kites were bought from supermarkets or supermarkets. Most of them were tourists from Sunling Park. When they came out of the park, they saw someone pushing a cart selling kites on the lawn. So, they went up and bought a kite to fly. Hua Jin's kite, however, was bought from Leji Holdings' flagship store. Apart from being able to fly like an ordinary kite, it was also equipped with an AI system. Furthermore, its workmanship was solid, which meant that no matter how high it flew or how strong the wind was, it would not break. Gradually, Gong Jie noticed that there were a lot of people around him. Parents were holding their children's hands. There were also a few young girls and boys around him. However, they were all looking at him differently. The children were envious of the kite in his hand. It could fly so high. Then, they looked at the kite that he had picked up with a broken string. The young girls, on the other hand, were looking at Gong Jie with mesmerized eyes. They did not move an inch away from him. Blue sky, white clouds, green grass, and this handsome man. Gong Jie's appearance had, without a doubt, attracted a lot of attention. "Quick, look! The guy flying the kite is so handsome. This is the first time I've seen such a handsome man in real life. Is he an internet celebrity? Or a celebrity? He's so tall. Could he be a model? His features are so sharp. He doesn't look like a celebrity. It's a pity that he's not a celebrity." Hua Jin saw that more and more people were gathering around. He immediately picked up the mask and put it on, for fear that others would recognize him as Hua Jin. Although he had already retired, his fan base was still very popular. Therefore, he had to be careful every time he went out. Hua Jin's popularity in the country was very high. He had acted in several phenomenal TV series, especially with Lethal Beauty. His popularity had reached a new level. In daily life, many people knew him. Actually, he didn't have many fans, but people had a herd mentality. As long as it was a celebrity, whether they knew him or not, they would surround him and ask for a photo. Fortunately, Gong Jie attracted most of the attention, so not many people noticed him. Hua Jin wore a mask and hid on the other side. After a while, the crowd grew larger and larger. Gong Jie came back to his senses and realized that he had been surrounded by a group of starry-eyed women. "Handsome, where did you buy your kite?" Chapter 4276. "How did you manage to fly your kite so high?" "I can't fly my kite high enough, and it always falls down for no reason." "Cutie, cutie, can you teach me how to fly a kite?" A group of women surrounded Gong Jie and chattered away. Some even tried to seduce him, and some even took out their phones to open WeChat's QR code, wanting to add Gong Jie as a friend. In front of such a handsome man, many of the women couldn't care less about their modesty. They blushed and mustered up their courage to strike up a conversation. Gong Jie was confused. He had been too focused on flying the kite earlier and hadn't paid attention to the women around him. He didn't know when, but he had been drowned by the sea of people. Natalia finally managed to fly the kite, and from the corner of her eye, she saw that there was a crowd of people dozens of meters away from Gong Jie. Gong Jie held the kite string in his hand, but he couldn't break through the crowd. She saw that the women were all rubbing their hands, eager to strike up a conversation with Gong Jie. Although she was still young, she knew that her daddy was being targeted by other women. With this heroic silhouette that was rarely seen in the secular world, it attracted bees and butterflies. However, Natalia couldn't allow Gong Jie to be coveted by others. She pursed her lips, thought for a moment, and walked toward Gong Jie with the kite in her hand. First, she was blocked out of the crowd. Natalia held the kite up high and pouted. "Daddy! Daddy!" She carefully tried to break through the crowd. "Excuse me, why are you all squeezing here?" "Daddy, Daddy." Hearing Natalia call for Daddy, the people around her noticed the little girl and were surprised. Oh my God! This little girl was so cute. Some sharp-eyed people even noticed Natalia's purple eyes and were shocked. Why are this girl's eyes purple? Could it be that she's wearing contact lenses? That's right, how can there be purple eyes in this world? Whose child is this? Her parents are too much. She's so young, but they put purple contact lenses on her. That's too much. What if her eyes get damaged? She seems to be calling someone daddy. Who is it? Whose child is that? Come and claim it. This child is so small. Be careful, don't squeeze her, don't step on her. The crowd began to spread the word. Gong Jie immediately fixed the reel to the hook on the ground and walked over to Natalia. "Excuse me." As he walked over, the crowd automatically parted to make a path for him. When Natalia saw him, she threw herself into his arms and sobbed in a voice that she had never used before. "Daddy, sob sob sob, why can't I fly my kite? I'm so angry." Gong Jie had never seen Natalia act so coquettishly. She threw herself into his arms and opened her arms for a hug. He obediently picked her up, which was equivalent to admitting that he was Natalia's father. At this moment, the expressions of the people around them changed. Shock, astonishment, disbelief, especially when they saw the little girl hugging Gong Jie and calling him daddy, they were even more shocked. What? This little brother was already a father? He looked so young, like he was in his 20s, but he was already a father? Chapter 4277. Many of the girls were heartbroken. Such a handsome young man was already married and had children. And they were still pitiful single dogs. Sure enough, diamond men nowadays were either married or gay. High-quality men had already settled down and started their own careers. Many of their faces were filled with disappointment. Seeing that her plan had succeeded, Natalia chuckled to herself. She gently wrapped her arms around Gong Jie's neck and gave him a peck on the cheek. The people around them exclaimed in surprise again, as well as looks of envy and jealousy. "Ah, I'm so envious. I'm suddenly so envious of that little girl. Yeah, if only I was the girl in that young man's arms. Why don't I have such a handsome father? This little girl is really good at reincarnating. I have to say, reincarnation is also a skill." The crowd surrounded Gong Jie and Natalia and discussed animatedly. Their gazes were filled with surprise, jealousy, and amazement. The noisy chatter of the people around them made Gong Jie frown. He turned around and glanced around coldly. Then, he shouted expressionlessly, "What are you all doing here? So fierce." Especially Gong Jie's cold and distant gaze. It felt as if a gust of cold wind from the Arctic Ocean had blown over the huge lawn. Not a single blade of grass grew. The crowd was shivering from the cold. Soon, they dispersed like floodwaters. There was not a single person around. Seeing that everyone had left, Natalia felt a little better. She did not like the feeling of Gong Jie being stared at like an animal in a zoo. She always felt that those gazes were disgusting. What she did not expect, though, was that a single look from the man was enough to scare this group of people into scattering like birds and beasts. Hua Jin took off his mask and widened his eyes in shock. See? It really was not his fault. Gong Jie's piercing glare was enough to make anyone afraid. However, he was indeed the devil. Just one gaze was enough to scare off so many people and make them flee. This showed how terrifying Gong Jie's aura was. Those women actually dare to covet my daddy, too much. Natalia hugged his shoulder and said angrily, "Daddy is mine. No one can take him away from me." When Gong Jie heard this, his furrowed brows finally relaxed slightly. However, he pretended to be calm as he pinched her cheek and asked with raised brows, "Didn't someone say before that she should love other men more in the future? Why has her attitude changed so much now?" Hua Jin gulped. She didn't expect that this guy was still brooding over what she said in the car just now. She was too petty. How could she be so calculative over a child's words? Natalia, however, disagreed. "Who said that?" "You were the one who said it." Natalia pouted but refused to admit it. She pouted and said, "I didn't say that. I think it's very important." "Then, if he and I fall into the river at the same time, who will you save first?" The corners of Hua Jin's lips twitched when he heard that. Why would such a cold and aloof great demon king ask such a childish question? When Natalia heard this, she frowned and asked him an even more difficult question. "If I fall into a cesspool, will you save me and give me mouth-to-mouth resuscitation?" Gong Jia was speechless. Chapter 4278. Gong Jia was momentarily at a loss for words. He didn't know how to answer this question. Where did this clever girl come up with this question? He didn't even know how to answer this question. Just by hearing this question, the strong image in his mind was about to come to life. Ha ha ha. Hua Jin couldn't hold it in any longer and burst out laughing. This rhetorical question was perfect. It was an interrogation of the soul. Natalia raised her eyebrows proudly and pressed on, "You're not willing to save me?" "I'm willing. Then are you willing to give me mouth-to-mouth resuscitation?" Gong Jia frowned. He had always had a serious obsession with cleanliness, so just imagining that scene made him feel nauseous. He put Natalia down with an ashen face. It was obvious that something was wrong with his expression. "You're not allowed to ask this question in the future." Natalia was puzzled when she heard this. Why? This isn't a question a lady should ask. As Gong Jie spoke, he frowned and asked in return, "Where did you hear this question from?" I'm not telling you." Natalia stuck out her tongue playfully at him and ran toward Hua Jin. Seeing her run toward Hua Jin, Gong Jie's meaningful gaze fell on Hua Jin. Naturally, he would think that this person had probably instilled this question in her. When Hua Jin met his gaze, he couldn't help but shudder. He wanted to explain, but he also felt that if he forced himself to explain, it would make it seem like he was trying to hide something, or it would make it seem like he was trying to hide something. But he really wasn't the one who had instilled this question in her. Hua Jin tugged at Natalia's little hand and asked seriously, "Who did you learn this question from?" "Does it matter who I learned it from?" "You can't answer it anyway." "That means that if I really fell into a cesspool, you won't save me and give me mouth-to-mouth resuscitation." "I will." Hua Jin clenched his fists and vowed solemnly. This time, it was Natalia's turn to stare at him as though she had seen a ghost. He said he was willing. Why couldn't she believe it? "I don't believe it." Hua Jin said lightly, "It's right that you don't believe it. I also don't believe that you would really fall into a cesspool." Natalia was dumbfounded. Even though this sounded like the truth and she didn't really have the chance to fall into the cesspool, this question theoretically didn't exist. Then, there was no such thing as whether she was willing or not. However, Hua Jin's answer was suspicious of being lazy. This time, it was Gong Jie's turn to feel better. Hua Jin was able to restrain this little fellow with just one sentence. He had a whole new level of respect for him now. Upon hearing this, Natalia immediately turned around and said to her brother, "I can answer your question now." I will also jump into the river to accompany you, to die for love. Gong Jia and Hua Jin were both dumbfounded. What kind of answer was this? Anyway, you won't really fall into the river. Moreover, even if you really fall into the river, I won't be able to drag you. However, I don't ask to be born in the same year, month, and day, but I will definitely die in the same year, month, and day. Hua Jin and Gong Jia were completely stunned. This answer was really too perfunctory. Chapter 4279. Natalia giggled and said, "All right, let's not dwell on such a pointless topic. You are all very important to me. I can't give up on any of you." A pointless topic, Hua Jin chuckled and glanced at Gong Jia. However, he saw him turn away expressionlessly with a strange expression on his face. Just like that, Hua Jin accompanied Natalia as she flew the kite for a while. Finally, the kite was in the air and the wind was getting stronger. However, Natalia didn't look too happy as she looked at the kite flying in the sky. Hua Jin saw that she looked a little lost and couldn't help but lean over to ask, "What's wrong? You look unhappy." Natalia pouted and looked at him. She sighed emotionally and said, "I miss you." Hua Jin was stunned for a moment when he heard that. He couldn't help but laugh. Wanting to tease her, he asked tentatively, "You, don't tell me you like you?" "Of course I like you." Natalia obviously didn't catch the hidden meaning in Hua Jin's eyes. Her gaze was so pure that when Hua Jin looked into her eyes, he felt that his thoughts were too sinful. Actually, the mutual love between children was really very simple. The attraction of opposites also existed between children. However, it was very difficult for such a young child to understand what love was in the adult world. She also couldn't understand those complicated feelings. Liking a boy or a girl was purely because he was good-looking and she was pretty. They liked to play with each other. It was that simple. Natalia seemed to be a little dependent on Yu. This dependence was no less than her dependence on Gong Jia. Hua Jin said, "Why don't we go to Yu's house after we're done flying the kite? What do you think?" Natalia's eyes lit up and she became much more energetic. Okay. You play here first. I'll go get my phone and give you a call." "All right." Hua Jin walked to the side, took out his phone, and found Yun Shusher's number. Gong Jia had just put away the kite when he saw that he seemed to be on the phone. He asked suspiciously, "Who are you calling?" Hua Jin said casually, "Oh, I called Shusher. Natalia said that she wanted to play with Yu. Since you rarely come back, why don't we have dinner together?" When Gong Jia heard this, he nodded. "Okay." Hua Jin dialed the number. After a long silence, the call finally went through. The person on the other end of the line spoke, but it was Xiao Yichen's low and trembling voice. "Hello?" Hua Jin stared blankly for a moment and asked curiously, "Eh? Why are you answering the phone? Where's your mommy?" The other side was silent for a while. What Xiao Yichen said next made Hua Jin's eyelids twitch violently. "Mommy, something happened." Hearing this, Hua Jin's eyes widened in shock. He sucked in a breath of cold air and held his breath. Beside him, Gong Jia noticed the strange reaction on his face and frowned slightly. Finally, Hua Jin came back to his senses with difficulty and immediately asked anxiously, "What happened?" "It's very complicated. Anyway, come to the hospital first." With that, Xiao Yichen hurriedly hung up the phone. When Hua Jin heard the busy tone on the other end of the line, he held the phone in a daze. Gong Jia walked over and asked solemnly, "What happened?" "Sure, something happened." Chapter 4280. At the mention of Yun Shusher, Gong Jia instantly tensed up. His breath caught in his throat as he walked up to Hua Jin and gripped his shoulders tightly. "What happened?" Gong Jia was very strong and Hua Jin was in pain. However, he knew that Gong Jia was too concerned and worried. Therefore, he endured the pain and calmed himself down. He comforted him and said, "Gong Jia, calm down. I don't know what happened. Anyway, let's go to the hospital first. From Xiao Yichen's tone, it shouldn't be life-threatening. When Gong Jie heard that Hua Jin's life wasn't in danger, the tense muscles on his face relaxed a little. However, his fingertips were still trembling slightly. Hua Jin turned around and instructed Natalia to keep the kite. When Natalia heard that, she was a little surprised and said that she wanted to play with it for a while more. It wasn't until Hua Jin said that he had something to deal with that Natalia realized that something urgent must have happened when she saw his serious expression. She carefully asked, "Then, can we still play with you tonight?" "I'm afraid not today." "I'm sorry, Natalia. Can we do it another day?" Hua Jin's attitude was sincere. When Natalia heard this, she looked disappointed but considerately told him that it was okay. It was obvious that something serious must have happened. Natalia wasn't a willful child. They quickly kept the kite, got into the car, and drove as fast as lightning. First, they sent Natalia home. Then, Gong Jie and Hua Jin rushed to the hospital according to the location that Xiao Yichen had given them. 20 minutes later, the two of them finally arrived at the hospital. When they walked to the door of the ward, they saw Xiao Yichen and Mu Yaja sitting outside. Gong Jie hurriedly walked over and looked at Xiao Yichen. Then, he looked at Mu Yaja, who had a serious expression on his face. His heart sank. What's going on? What's going on? When Mu Yaja and Xiao Yichen heard hurried footsteps, they looked up and saw Hua Jin and Gong Jie rushing over. Mu Yaja stood up. Just as he was about to say something, he turned around worriedly and glanced through the window. Through the transparent glass of the window, he could see a few doctors surrounding Yun Shishir in the ward. They were whispering to each other, but he couldn't hear what they were talking about through the glass. The nurse was cleaning Yun Shishir's wounds. Gong Jie's face turned pale when he saw the blood-stained cotton balls on the tray. What's going on? Xiao Yichen, on the other hand, had a solemn expression on his face. He lowered his head in silence, looking exhausted. Gong Jie didn't expect to get any information from Xiao Yichen, so he turned to look at Mu Yaja. Mu Yaja said slowly, "She was stabbed in the abdomen. The doctor said that the injury isn't serious. She's receiving a blood transfusion now." She was stabbed. Gong Jie was furious when he heard that. Who stabbed her? Hua Jin was also in disbelief when he heard that Yun Shishir had been stabbed. How did she get stabbed out of nowhere? Yun Shishir was usually followed by bodyguards from afar whenever she went out. How could Yun Shishir get hurt? Gong Jie was still upset that Mu Yaja didn't protect her well. However, what Mu Yaja said next made Gong Jie and Hua Jin fall into a daze again. Mu Yaja said, Gong Fan was the one who stabbed her. No one expected it. Chapter 4281. How is that possible? Hua Jin was the first to be suspicious. Why did Gong Fan stab Shishir? Mu Yaja lifted his head and glanced at him. His handsome brows were slightly furrowed and his eyes were filled with confusion. This had happened in the afternoon. In the morning, he had left the ward to go to the office because he had some matters to attend to. When he returned, he saw Yun Shishir sitting in front of Gong Fan's bed and peeling an apple for him. Seeing that Gong Fan was still unconscious, he went to the bathroom to take a shower. However, just as he was about to wash the dishes, he heard a strange noise coming from the ward. Then, he heard Xiao Yichen scream. He didn't have time to dry himself. He put on a bathrobe and rushed out, only to see Yun Shishir clutching her abdomen. Her body was bent over and she was kneeling on the floor. There was a horrifying pool of blood under her knees. Gong Fan stood by the side and looked at Yun Shishir coldly. He was holding a fruit knife in his hand that was still stained with Yun Shishir's blood. He was holding the knife so tightly that it seemed like he was going to break the handle. A fruit knife like this would stay in a person's body because of the suction force of the flesh. If one didn't have enough strength, it would be difficult to pull it out. It was obvious that Gong Fan had pulled the knife out after stabbing Yun Shishir once. Seeing that he had raised the fruit knife and was about to stab Yun Shishir again, Xiao Yichen heard the commotion and rushed over in time to protect Yun Shishir. Until now, Xiao Yichen still had a lingering fear. He didn't dare to imagine what would have happened if he had left the ward to get the hot water. No one could have predicted what would have happened. In any case, Xiao Yichen was really scared out of his wits and still hadn't recovered from the shock. Mu Yaja carried Yun Shishir and rushed her to the emergency room. Xiao Yichen stayed behind to look after Gong Fan. When Yun Shishir was sent to the emergency room and the doctor came out to report that her life wasn't in danger, Mu Yaja returned to the ward. By then, Gong Fan had already fainted and the entire ward was heavily guarded by Mu Yaja. Fortunately, Mu Yaja didn't panic. This incident hadn't spread yet. Other than Mu Yaja and Xiao Yichen, no one else knew how Yun Shishir got injured out of the blue. Because it happened in the hospital wanted to investigate the matter. However, because the victim was Mu Yaja's wife, the hospital didn't dare to investigate further. They only asked a few questions and Mu Yaja gave a perfunctory reply. After that, they didn't dare to say anything else. They only saved her while trembling in fear and didn't dare to interfere anymore. Gong Fan's ward had been sealed by Mu Yaja's men. In the huge ward, there were only a few trustworthy nurses and doctors. The rest of the people were Yu Yu's personal bodyguards. Mu Yaja still didn't have the energy to care about Yun Shishir and didn't know his motive for stabbing Yun Shishir. However, according to Xiao Yichen, if he hadn't stopped him, Gong Fan would have stabbed Yun Shishir to death. He couldn't understand what kind of deep hatred made Gong Fan insist on stabbing Yun Shishir to death. That was murder. Gong Fan was crazy. Why did he do that? This was no longer an injury, but simply an attempt to kill him. Gong Fan wanted to kill Yun Shishir. Xiao Yichen was filled with anger at the thought of Gong Fan's ruthlessness. Chapter 4282. Now, Yun Shishir had yet to wake up. No one knew what had happened at that time. He was an adult and had the ability to reason that Xiao Yichen, a child, did not have. Gong Fan was not stupid. On the contrary, his personality was more shrewd than Yu Yu's. Why would he do something that was disadvantageous to him? What good would it do him to kill Yun Shishir? Mu Yaja could not understand this logic. Hence, he told Xiao Yichen not to think so much for the time being. Perhaps when Gong Fan woke up, the truth would be revealed. Compared to Xiao Yichen's impulsiveness, Gong Jia was much more rational. Impossible. He furrowed his eyebrows, unwilling to believe it. No matter what happened, I will not believe that Gong Fan would hurt Yun Shishir. When Xiao Yichen heard this, he stood up angrily. He restrained himself and said unhappily, I saw it with my own eyes. Gong Fan held a knife and stabbed Mommy. I saw it with my own eyes. How could it be wrong? He used to like Gong Fan very much, but this did not mean that he could tolerate Gong Fan hurting Yun Shishir. However, Gong Jia thought in a different direction. Gong Jia knew very well what Yun Shishir represented to Gong Fan. This was Gong Fan's warmest obsession in this world. Yun Shishir was as important to Gong Fan as she was to Xiao Yichen and Yu Yu. To Gong Fan, Yun Shishir's existence was more like a lighthouse. How could he hurt the lighthouse in his heart? Although Gong Jia's heart ached that Yun Shishir was injured, this matter could not be concluded just by seeing it with his own eyes. Hua Jin immediately comforted him, Xiao Yichen, calm down and be rational. I'm already very rational. If it wasn't for Yu Yu's body, I would have broken his hand. Xiao Yichen gritted his teeth. It was obvious that he had been holding it in for a long time. Sometimes, what you see may not be true. So, don't make the final decision. Wait for your mommy to wake up and ask about the cause and effect of this matter. Gong Jia looked at Mu Yaja and asked, have you told Alice about this matter? No. Mu Yaja shook his head. From the beginning of the incident until now, they did not give anyone a chance to breathe. After they sent Yun Shishir to the emergency room, they came back to make arrangements for Gong Fan to arrange things. After Yun Shishir to be sent to the hospital, to choose to make arrangements. It's better to tell her about this matter. Mu Yaja made an excuse. He did not want Alice to be involved in this matter for the time being. At the very least, he had to wait for Yun Shishir and Gong Fan to wake up first. No one could say for sure what had happened at that time. Even Xiao Yichen was a later matter. No one could say for sure why Gong Fan wanted to stab Yun Shishir. After a while, the doctor and nurse walked out. Mu Yaja immediately stood up and asked about the situation. It's nothing serious. The wound is not deep. Chapter 4283. Xiao Yichen was silent for a while. Suddenly, he punched the long bench hard. A creaking sound was heard, and the surface of the bench was slightly damaged. Gong Fan wants to replace Yu. Dream on. If not for the fact that Yu pitted him and didn't want him to disappear and was willing to coexist with him, with Yu's ability, he would definitely be able to completely destroy his personality. Now, he actually treated Mommy and Yu like this. He's a devil. When he thought of the bloody scene that Xiao Yichen had witnessed, his heart throbbed with pain. He could never bear for anyone to hurt Yun Shishir. Therefore, he could never forgive Gong Fan. I won't forgive him. Xiao Yichen gritted his teeth and said, never. When Gong Fan woke up, he had a terrible headache. He held his forehead, not knowing what had happened. However, his memory was still stuck on the night before. He vaguely remembered that at night, because of the stomachache, he randomly found painkillers in the drawer. He didn't care about the dosage and took 4 or 5 pills in one go. After that, he didn't expect that not only did it not work, but his whole body started to spin and it started to become difficult to breathe. He curled up on the bed, thinking that it was a side effect of taking the painkillers. He wanted to endure it and get through it. In the end, he couldn't get through it. When he regained some consciousness, he was already in the hospital. In the resuscitation room, while he was in a daze, he felt the doctor continuously moving a tube into his throat. It was painful. When the tube went in, Gong Fan shuddered and spat out everything in his stomach. He wanted to bend over, but the doctor forced him to stay still. At that time, the doctor compared him to those who were seeking death. Those who came to the hospital to have their stomachs pumped were children under the age of 3 who had eaten by mistake. However, those above the age of 8 who came were basically suicidal and had taken sleeping pills or pesticides. Therefore, the doctors and nurses thought that Gong Fan was also trying to die. When they saw that he was about to sit up, they nervously surrounded him and held him down tightly. Under such torture, his consciousness became clearer and clearer. There was water all over the bed, and it was hard to tell what was from the gastric lavage and what was vomited out. He felt like a fish on a chopping board waiting to be slaughtered. He struggled in pain, feeling the baptism of the doctors' and nurses' cold gazes. By the time the gastric lavage was over, Gong Fan was already exhausted. Immediately after, the nurse inserted a needle into his wrist, and after that, he lost consciousness. That was probably the effect of the sedative. He began to have nightmares. In the nightmares, he seemed to be floating in the sky, and below him was his body lying quietly on the hospital bed, motionless. His face was as white as wax, without any signs of life or blood. Beside the bed, Yun Shishir sat on a small stool and was carefully peeling the apple for him with a fruit knife. She also carefully cut the apple into pieces. Gong Fan did not know what had happened. He only felt that the person on the bed had sat up. He was shocked and did not understand what was going on. He even suspected that his personality had been exiled and was no longer in his body. His body actually started to move on its own. Was he dreaming? Chapter 4284. But why did the voice and the image seem so real? At that time, was Yu the one controlling your body? Just as he was wondering, he saw the child on the bed snatch the fruit knife from Yun Shishir's hand. Under her shocked and terrified gaze, he raised the fruit knife in his hand high and stabbed it at Yun Shishir at lightning speed. No! He screamed at the top of his lungs to stop it. He felt as if his soul had flown to Yun Shishir. He opened his arms, wanting to block the knife for her. However, the fruit knife pierced through his body and went straight into Yun Shishir's abdomen. Was it a dream? Gong Fan held his head in vexation. He only felt a faint pain in his temples and his forehead was also in great pain, as if he had been punched by someone. He lifted the blanket and got out of bed. Just as he walked out of the ward, he saw a few people in the lobby. The reason why he described it as dark was because there were a few bodyguards standing in the lobby. They were tall and well-built, making the entire room seem much smaller. "Who are you?" Gong Fan was instantly alerted and glanced at them. When the bodyguards saw that he had woken up, they immediately sent someone to inform Mu Yaja outside the door. Mu Yaja and Xiao Yichen walked in. When Gong Fan saw them, he didn't see Yun Shishir and was instantly suspicious. "Where's mommy?" Xiao Yichen's expression was already unpleasant when he saw him. When he heard him mention Yun Shishir, his expression became even more tense. "You're not allowed to mention mommy." Xiao Yichen said coldly, "You don't deserve to call her mommy." Gong Fan was baffled by his cold demeanor, and his tone was somewhat frosty. "Why are you yelling at me?" He had never seen Xiao Yichen so angry before, so he couldn't help but feel a little strange. Xiao Yichen had never been so fierce to him. He had always spoken to him gently. However, at this moment, Gong Fan saw hatred on Xiao Yichen's face. He actually felt a little unfamiliar. What's wrong? Gong Fan didn't know why Xiao Yichen was glaring at him with such hatred. What exactly happened? Stop playing dumb with us. Why don't you just say it directly? What is your purpose? Gong Fan, he didn't know how to answer this question. Objective? Gong Fan could not help but laugh. What motive? What purpose do you think I have? I know, you must want to replace you, right? Xiao Yichen was on the verge of losing control. Mu Yaja immediately grabbed his shoulder and scolded, "Don't talk nonsense." "I'm not talking nonsense. It was all his fault. It's all his fault." Xiao Yichen's eyes were bloodshot. Ever since he appeared, this family has been turned upside down. Originally, this wouldn't have happened. It was all his fault. He wanted to destroy this family. No matter how calm Gong Fan was, when he heard this, he couldn't pretend to be shocked. His facial muscles tensed up slightly, and a look of disappointment flashed across his eyes. Gong Jia was guarding Yun Shishir's ward. Hua Jin was standing outside the door. When he heard the commotion in the room, he rushed in. However, when he saw the confrontation between the two parties, he was a little dazed. What's going on? Why are the two of them arguing? Chapter 4285. He and I have never been brothers. Xiao Yichen was so angry that he started to speak without thinking. Yu has always been my brother. He's not my brother, he's just an intruder. Gong Fan's face turned even uglier when he heard this. His face turned red, but he stubbornly pursed his lips and didn't say a word. Even though he pretended to be calm, Xiao Yichen's cold and resolute words had already set off a storm in his heart. He and I have never been brothers. Yu has always been my brother. He's not my brother, he's just an intruder. An intruder? So in Xiao Yichen's heart, he was just an intruder. Then, was it the same in other people's hearts as well? Gong Fan's lips trembled slightly. When he thought of this possibility, it was as if his heart was being pierced. He lifted his head and looked at Mu Yaja and Hua Jin. His gaze swept across every inch of their faces, trying his best to catch a hint of what they were thinking. Was the concern in their eyes sincere? Or was it just an act? Or were they worried that he would harm Yu, so they were just acting, pretending to be concerned about him and treating him like family? Was all of this fake? When he thought of this, Gong Fan felt as if countless sharp swords were piercing his heart. Sad, Gong Fan lowered his head in a daze, revealing a desolate expression. When Xiao Yichen saw this, he thought that he was still acting. He angrily rushed in front of him and grabbed his shoulders tightly. In a low voice, he said, "Please return Yu to me and don't let us see you again. Leave us and don't pester us anymore." What family? We don't have a family like you. It was obvious that in Xiao Yichen's heart, Gong Fan, who had personally stabbed Yun Shishir and even wanted to kill Yun Shishir, had committed an unforgivable crime. However, Gong Fan didn't move at all. He was like a puppet without a soul and didn't react at all. When Mu Yaja saw this, he couldn't bear it. He walked over and stopped Xiao Yichen. Mu Yichen, calm down. Are you crazy? He felt that this matter wasn't that simple, but he was an adult after all. He would consider everything from a different perspective. Even if Xiao Yichen saw it with his own eyes, from another perspective, Gong Fan didn't have any motive to do that. In other words, it wouldn't do him any good. Although he had his doubts, he didn't make a conclusion. I'm not crazy. Little Yichen defended himself. Daddy, haven't you realized it yet? You've always treated him as your own, but what happened when he came to our house? We tolerated him, accepted, but he wanted to hurt Yu Yu's mommy. I can't forgive him and I don't listen to him. I didn't. Gong Fan used the last bit of energy in his body to try and explain. I really didn't. I don't want to listen to you. Get out of this body. This was a very harsh sentence. Xiao Yichen suddenly pushed him away. Gong Fan was caught off guard and was pushed to the ground. Mu Yaja pulled Xiao Yichen over and raised his hand to pinch his face. Chapter 4286. Because of Mu Yaja's pull, Mu Yichen took half a step back. However, he was still glaring at Gong Fan like a ferocious beast waiting to pounce. He had completely lost control. Usually, no matter how big the danger was, no matter how scary the situation was, he was always everyone's mental support and could always maintain a calm appearance. However, he had only touched Yun Shusher. This was his bottom line and a reverse scale that he couldn't touch. He had seen with his own eyes how Gong Fan had used a fruit knife to stab Yun Shusher and even wanted to kill her. Those scenes were like a nightmare that kept replaying before his eyes. How could he forgive Gong Fan? From what he knew, it was Gong Fan's appearance that had turned this family upside down. The more he loved, the more he hated. It wasn't that he had never accepted Gong Fan. However, it was the person who had betrayed them so unwaveringly and deeply. This was the most unforgivable thing. Gong Fan fell to the ground, looking extremely pathetic. Hua Jin walked over and wanted to comfort him, but Gong Fan carefully broke free. He could no longer tell if the people around him were genuinely concerned about him or if they were just pretending. He felt that other than Yun Shusher, there was no one else who truly cared about him. However, Xiao Yichen said that he had stabbed Yun Shusher with his own hands. However, he really didn't. Why didn't anyone believe his words? In the end, Gong Fan explained, I really didn't. I wouldn't do such a thing. If it wasn't you, who could it be? Don't tell me it was Yu. Xiao Yichen definitely didn't believe that Yu had done this. To Yu, Yun Shusher was like his life. In fact, she was even more precious than his own life. How could he bear to hurt the person he loved the most? Gong Fan's gaze became hollow. Did no one believe his words? If he said no, then no. If he was the one who did it, he would definitely admit to it. But if he wasn't the one who did it, how could he admit to it? It wasn't an accusation that Yu was the one who did it, but why should he be blamed for something that he didn't do? Gong Fan was so sad that he wanted to cry. However, at that moment, his tears were accumulated in his heart. His heart seemed to have been stabbed by an invisible knife. The tears that flowed out were mixed with blood. It was impossible to tell them apart. When Hua Jin saw him like this, he felt very conflicted. Heartache, doubt, struggle, disbelief. Xiao Yichen said that he saw Gong Fan stabbing Yun Shusher with a fruit knife with his own eyes. He even had the intention to kill her. It was a shocking scene. He didn't see it with his own eyes, so he couldn't say for sure what had happened. He couldn't accuse Gong Fan based on Xiao Yichen's one-sided statement. He couldn't possibly doubt Xiao Yichen's words just because of Gong Fan's one-sided statement. However, when he saw Gong Fan's sad and disappointed expression, Hua Jin felt an inexplicable pain in his heart. Get up. The floor is cold. He reached out to help him up, but Gong Fan stood up silently. However, his face was ashen and his body swayed slightly. Just as he was about to fall, he reached out to hold on to the door frame and barely steadied himself. He didn't want to say another word. "Mommy, where is she?" Xiao Yichen said that Yun Shishir was injured and he wanted to see her. Chapter 4287. When Xiao Yichen heard this, he sneered, "You don't deserve to see her, and you don't deserve to call her mommy." Gong Fan's face turned completely pale. He clenched his fists tightly. There was no doubt that Xiao Yichen's words had completely infuriated him. "I don't deserve to? Why don't I deserve to? I want to see her." Gong Fan wasn't sure if Yun Shishir thought the same of him or if she felt the same way. When he thought of this, Gong Fan couldn't wait to see Yun Shishir and explain himself. Even if the whole world misunderstood him and thought that he was the main culprit, it didn't matter. However, Yun Shishir was the only one he couldn't do that to. He didn't care what other people thought. He only cared about Yun Shishir's opinion of him. Gong Fan immediately walked out of the door. When Xiao Yichen saw this, he immediately chased after him and grabbed his shoulders tightly. He asked coldly, "You're not allowed to see mommy. Didn't you hear what I said?" Gong Fan suddenly turned around and gave him a hard shove. Caught off guard, Xiao Yichen was pushed to the ground with such force. It was such a sudden attack that Xiao Yichen wasn't prepared for it. Furthermore, Gong Fan was quite strong. Especially when he was angry, his strength was multiplied. Gong Fan glared at him with bloodshot eyes. "I'm warning you, I'm running out of patience. I want to see mommy right now, right now." Xiao Yichen quickly got up from the ground. Hua Jin wanted to persuade him, but Xiao Yichen flung him away. "You're not allowed to come over. This is between the two of us." As he said this, Xiao Yichen casually took off his jacket and threw it aside. He rolled up his sleeves and said coldly, "Unless you can defeat me, don't even think about walking out of this door." Hua Jin was completely stunned. He had never seen such a terrifying aura from Xiao Yichen. It was as if there was a fire burning behind him. Gong Fan stared at him expressionlessly. The expression on his face was equally terrifying. The two of them stood facing each other. Their auras were astonishing, and they were evenly matched. The entire room fell into a state of depression because of the battle between the two of them. Xiao Yichen was blocking the door. If she wanted to leave the room, she had to go through him. Gong Fan did not want to fight with him, but that did not mean that he was afraid of fighting with him. He walked straight to the door. He wanted to pass through the gap between Xiao Yichen and the door, but Xiao Yichen took a step to the left and blocked his path. In the next second, Gong Fan clenched his fist and punched him in the face. Xiao Yichen raised his hand to catch it, but Gong Fan's punch was extremely fast. For a long time, Xiao Yichen trained with Gong Fan. Growing up in such a family, they had to learn some fighting skills from a young age to protect themselves. In the past, Yu Yu's health was not good. However, on Ashland Island, under Alice's meticulous care, his health improved greatly. Little Yichen was also reassured by his son's physical condition and began to teach him some kickboxing and fighting techniques. In this aspect, Gong Fan was not as talented as Xiao Yichen. He was also not as strong as Xiao Yichen. However, under Xiao Yichen's guidance, he was able to achieve some results. However, compared to Xiao Yichen, he was still a far cry. Mu Yichen threw him to the ground with one hand. Gong Fan fell to the ground, but he quickly got up and pounced on Xiao Yichen again. Chapter 4288. The two of them were entangled in a fight. Hua Jin was trembling with fear as he watched from behind. Initially, he had hoped that Mu Yaja would step forward to mediate the fight. However, when he turned around and looked at the extremely calm man beside him, he was even more shocked. "Brother-in-law, are you just going to watch them fight like this?" Mu Yaja pursed his lips. "It's useless for me to mediate when the two of them are fighting. Why don't we just pull them apart?" "Don't worry, Xiao Yichen won't hurt Xiao Yichen. Even if Gong Fan uses all kinds of methods, he won't be able to hurt Xiao Yichen." He was certain that nothing would happen if the two of them fought like this. However, Xiao Yichen was doing this for two reasons. Firstly, he was venting his anger. Secondly, he was giving himself a reason to trust Gong Fan again. He must be telling himself that if Gong Fan defeated him, he would reluctantly trust him again. Hua Jin watched helplessly as Gong Fan clenched his fists and grabbed Xiao Yichen's collar. Then, he punched him repeatedly in the face. Xiao Yichen tilted his head left and right and nimbly dodged the attacks. Then, he retaliated with a punch that landed on the corner of Gong Fan's mouth. Gong Fan's teeth hit his lips and instantly started bleeding. However, Gong Fan was oblivious to it. He growled and attacked Xiao Yichen from both sides again. He was so worried about Yun Shishir that he was going crazy. How could he not be worried when Xiao Yichen blocked him in such a domineering manner? As a result, he didn't know how to control his strength. Xiao Yichen could defend against 10 of his attacks, but he might not be able to block all of them. Bam! Xiao Yichen was careless and was quickly punched by Gong Fan. The strength of this punch was not to be underestimated. Xiao Yichen's back hit the door frame and he almost lost his balance. Gong Fan took the opportunity to break through Xiao Yichen's obstruction and swept past him. Xiao Yichen had no intention of stopping her. She held her reddened cheekbones and stood up straight, but her eyes were obviously red. Hua Jin immediately walked over and asked worriedly, "Does it hurt? Is it important?" "It's fine." Xiao Yichen pushed him away in annoyance. "Don't talk to me." As he spoke, he walked to the sofa and sat up. It was obvious that his anger had not subsided. Hua Jin's hands hung down helplessly, and he rubbed his forehead with a headache. Mu Yaja said, "You've already fought. Enough is enough. It's time to stop." With that, he left as well. Xiao Yichen leaned against the sofa. His messy fringe fell over his eyes and covered his eyes, but it couldn't hide the viciousness in his eyes. Yun Shishir, female, 29 years old. At the nurse's desk, Gong Fan provided his name and age and asked the nurse to help find out which ward Yun Shishir was in. The patient is currently in Intensive Care Unit A029. However, you can't visit her in the ward yet. "Oh, thank you." Gong Fan turned around and walked into Ward A029. The nurse looked at Gong Fan's back view and couldn't help but mumble enviously, "This little guy is so cool." Gong Fan walked to the door of the ward and saw Gong Jia sitting on the long bench outside the ward. When he heard footsteps, he immediately looked up. When he saw that it was him, his expression changed slightly. "You're awake?" He was a little wary. Xiao Yichen said that Yun Shishir was stabbed by Gong Fan and that he even wanted to kill her. Hence, he was wary. However, he didn't show any signs of being particularly wary. This was because he was confident that he could protect Yun Shishir well. When Gong Jia saw that the corner of Gong Fan's mouth was broken, he guessed that it was Xiao Yichen's arm. He knew that the two little guys must have fought. Chapter 4289. The window curtains were drawn and the nurse was changing the dressing inside. Gong Fan stood outside the window and couldn't see inside. Hence, he turned around and asked Gong Jia, "How's mommy?" It was as if he didn't know that Yun Shishir was so badly injured because of him. Gong Jia was suspicious. "Don't you remember what happened before?" When Gong Fan heard this, he was very disappointed. "You also suspect that I stabbed her?" Gong Jia was very calm and didn't overreact. "This is the truth. You stabbed mommy, didn't you? Xiao Yichen and your daddy saw it with their own eyes." "I didn't," Gong Fan explained. Of course, he didn't expect Gong Jia to believe him. He didn't care what Gong Jia thought of him. He only cared about Yun Shishir. Gong Jia stood up and looked at him seriously. He frowned slightly. "What's your motive? What good does it do you to stab your mommy?" When Gong Fan heard this, he smiled indifferently. "Why do you only suspect me and not you?" Gong Jia was stunned. "It can only mean that you don't have the heart to accept me. All that talk about peaceful coexistence and treating me as your own is a joke. I don't believe that you will suspect you, but you will easily suspect me because my existence is a danger to you and you. Is that so? Gong Jie's sharp questioning made Gong Fan's expression change endlessly. At the end of the day, to you, an outsider will always be an outsider. Xiao Yichen said that I'm an intruder. I'm sure you, Mu Yaja, and Hua Jin are all intruders, right? The reason why you treat me so carefully is because you're worried that if I lose control, I will harm you, right? The more Gong Fan spoke, the more his voice trembled. Intruder. This word was too hurtful to him. Especially when Xiao Yichen said this word through gritted teeth, his heart felt as if someone had cut it open with a knife. Until now, it was still in a bloody state. When Gong Jie heard this, he was speechless. Why? You have nothing to say? Gong Fan took a deep breath. Forget it. I don't care what you think of me. I want to see Mommy. Gong Jie said, you can't enter the ward now. Why? Now is the infection period. We can only do that after the infection period. When Gong Fan heard this, he did not say another word. He turned around and sat on the bench without saying a word. Mu Yaja soon after. Gong Jie was scrutinizing Gong Fan, but Gong Fan's. He walked over and said calmly, you can't visit him yet. I know. You can come again later. I want to stay here and wait. Seeing how stubborn he was, Mu Yaja didn't say anything else. He looked at Gong Fan, who was staring at the window stubbornly. His hands were clenched into fists and placed on his knees. His shoulders were trembling slightly. His eyes turned red, but just as tears were about to flow out of his eyes, he forced them back. No one knew how much he was suffering and how uneasy he was. Even if in everyone's eyes, he was the culprit and everyone believed that he was the one who wanted to harm Yunshusher, he didn't care. He didn't care. Chapter 4290. He didn't know what kind of injury Yunshusher had suffered, but he could only imagine how painful it must have been for the fruit knife to be pulled out from her abdomen. Would Mommy still believe him? What if she didn't believe him? Just imagining Yunshusher waking up and looking at him like how little Yichen looked at him was more hurtful than being stabbed hundreds of times with a knife. Heartache, uneasiness, panic, fear, all kinds of emotions lingered in his heart. He persevered alone. Gong Jie silently examined the child in front of him. He saw loneliness and stubbornness in his eyes. It was the kind of loneliness that seemed to be abandoned by the whole world, but still stubbornly holding on to his own stubbornness. Mu Yaja walked over with heartache, gently holding his shoulder and squeezing it. As a father, Mu Yaja had always expressed his feelings to his two sons in such a deep way. He usually didn't say any gentle words, but sometimes he would give them a firm look, and sometimes he would silently support them. Gong Fan could feel his heartache from his actions. He lowered his head but didn't look at him. His eyes fell on the ground, and his mind was empty. No one knew what he was thinking. Now, his thoughts were in a mess. He only hoped that Yunshusher would wake up soon. Even if he couldn't enter the ward, just looking at her through the window was enough. After a while, the beaded curtains of the window were pulled up. The nurse walked out with a tray. Gong Fan saw the alcohol swabs and gauze stained with blood on the tray, and his heart clenched. Gong Jie stood up and walked over, asking worriedly, how is she? The doctor said that there's no danger, but the wound is still infected, so she can't go in for the time being. When the dressing is changed tomorrow, if her condition is good, we can visit her normally. Gong Jie was still worried when he heard this. Is the wound deep? How should I put it? The nurse said helplessly, the wound is not fatal, but it's very deep. When the knife was pulled out, it left a second wound on the wound. The area of the wound is very large, and the skin is rolled up, so it's easy to get infected. However, her condition is good now, but she can't get out of bed for the time being. Gong Jie nodded his head at that and let her go. As soon as the nurse left, Mu Yaja and Gong Fan stood up almost at the same time and rushed to the window. Through the window, they looked at Yunshusher, who was lying quietly on the hospital bed. Yun Shusher's expression was very ugly. Her eyes were tightly shut, and her hair was scattered messily on the pillow. The blood bag had been replaced with a new one, but it was still flowing into her body. Mu Yaja felt sorry for himself. Mu Yaja was even willing to take the pain on her behalf. Gong Fan felt upset when he saw this. He really didn't know what had happened to him and why things had turned out this way. Was this really his doing? Gong Fan started to doubt himself. Xiao Yichen said that he was the one who stabbed him. Even Mu Yaja and Gong Jia looked at him suspiciously. What was wrong with him? Gong Fan actually felt a chill run down his spine. After calming down, he also felt that something was wrong. When he recalled that nightmare, he felt that it wasn't a simple dream, but more like his body was being controlled by someone else. But who could be controlling him? No one knew. It was the unknown that made his hair stand on end. Chapter 4291. Jia, along with the sound of hurried footsteps, Gong Jia heard a familiar voice and looked up. Alice rushed over in a hurry, only to see a group of people sitting at the door of the ward. Through the window, she saw Yun Shusher lying on the bed and was dumbfounded. What's going on? Gong Jia and Mu Yaja looked at each other. Both of them thought that it was the other who had called them over. Were you the one who called? Mu Yaja's first reaction was this. Gong Jia was stunned. He thought that Mu Yaja had called Alice over. Don't guess anymore. Alice explained, when I saw that Hua Jin and you didn't come home for so long, leaving Alice alone, I guessed that something must have happened, so I called to ask. Sure enough. What's going on? Gong Jia and Mu Yaja looked at each other. It was obvious that Gong Fan was sitting here now and it was a taboo. Alice was also very smart. Seeing that everyone was silent, she guessed that this matter must have something to do with Gong Fan. She didn't intend to pursue the matter, but in the end, Gong Fan said very calmly, I remember that there are surveillance cameras in the room, right? Let's check the surveillance footage. How about it? In a normal ward, there were no surveillance cameras. However, in the VIP suites, other than the bathroom, there were surveillance cameras. There were also 2 surveillance cameras installed in the direction of the bed. And when a normal patient needed to change their dressing and expose their body, there was a curtain on the bed that could be pulled up to cover them. Gong Fan's request to see the surveillance footage was unexpected. Gong Jia didn't even think of checking the surveillance footage. Most people didn't even notice the surveillance cameras in the ward. But Gong Fan noticed it. It was not difficult to obtain the authorization to play the surveillance video. With such authorization, Mu Yaja only needed to make a phone call, and the hospital sent people to respectfully welcome them into the surveillance center. Xiao Yichen was still agitated. Mu Yaja asked him to guard Yun Shusher while the others entered the surveillance center. They retrieved the video recording, adjusted the time, and began to play it. It happened in the afternoon of the same day. When the incident happened, Yun Shusher was sitting by the bed peeling an apple. Halfway through peeling, she realized that Gong Fan had woken up. She immediately put the half-peeled apple and fruit knife aside and went over. The video was silent. Hence, no one knew what Yun Shusher said to Gong Fan. However, from the video, half of Gong Fan's face was blocked by Yun Shusher's body. It just so happened that from this angle, one could see his increasingly cold eyes. His gaze suddenly turned to the apple on the bedside table. Yun Shusher also noticed his gaze and immediately smiled. Her mouth moved. Without thinking, she must have thought that Gong Fan wanted to eat the apple. Hence, she probably said that she had peeled the apple for him. Gong Fan didn't move and sat stiffly on the bed. Yun Shusher took the apple and continued to peel it. When the apple was cut into the fruit bag, Gong Fan suddenly reached out. However, he didn't want to take the fruit bag. Instead, he snatched the fruit knife from her hand. Yun Shusher's expression changed. She didn't even have time to stand up before Gong Fan made his move. He raised the fruit knife fiercely and stabbed it into her abdomen. Chapter 4292. This was exactly the same as what he had seen in his dream. How could this be? In that case, what he had seen back then was not a dream, but real. Had he really stabbed Yun Shishir with his own hands? Impossible. He was not the one who had controlled his body. Gong Fan's thoughts were in a mess. He hugged his head and felt a splitting headache. Alice watched the video seriously until Xiao Yichen appeared and stopped him in time. It was too dangerous. If Mu Yichen had not appeared in time, Yun Shishir's life would have been in danger. It was no wonder that Mu Yichen hated Gong Fan to the core. After witnessing such a terrifying scene with his own eyes, he still had a lingering fear. Just thinking about it, if he had not stopped it in time, the second stab would not have been in the abdomen, but in the lung. If the lung was punctured, then even if Hua Tuo was alive, he would not be able to save the situation. It's not me, Gong Fan clasped his wrist in frustration. He remembered that in the video and in the nightmare, it was this hand that had stabbed Yun Shishir ruthlessly. He clenched his wrists tightly, as if he wanted to break this evil hand. But, it was really not him. Why did this happen? Could there be a cold-blooded demon living in his body? Or, really, he really did it himself? Gong Fan did not know who to believe. He had never thought that existence would be so tiring. He even imagined that if he had quit early on, he would have self-destructed. Perhaps, this would not have happened. Was his existence really a scourge? Gong Fan could not stop doubting himself over and over again. After Alice finished watching the video, she did not continue watching it. She already knew what to do and ended the video. When she turned around, she saw that everyone had different expressions. She pondered for a moment, then smiled at Mu Yaja and said, "Young Master Mu, you guys can leave first. I have something to talk to Gong Fan alone." When Mu Yaja heard this, he looked at Gong Fan worriedly, only to see him lowering his head, clenching his hands tightly, and frowning. No one knew what he was thinking, and his heart ached. Alice immediately said, don't worry, I'm here, nothing will happen." When Gong Jia heard what Alice said, he knew that there were some things that he and Mu Yaja could not hear. Hence, he said to Mu Yaja, "Let's go out." The two of them then walked out. After the two of them left the control room, only Alice and Gong Fan were left in the huge room. At that moment, Alice said in a low voice, "I know you didn't do it." When Gong Fan heard this, his eyes were fiercely startled. He originally thought that Alice's first sentence would be to question him. He did not expect that she would actually believe him. "You believe me?" You know, sometimes a person's eyes can deceive and affect one's rational judgment. Alice said seriously, "Putting all these aside, I can't think of any motive for you to stab your mommy. Even if you really killed her, what good would it do you?" Gong Fan was silent for a long time. Finally, he decided to tell her everything that had happened to him. "I had a dream." "A dream?" "Yes." Gong Fan told Alice in detail what he had seen in his dream. When Alice heard this, her face fell. Chapter 4293. How could this be? Was I dreaming, or did you have an out-of-body experience? I don't know what it feels like to have an out-of-body experience, but I felt as if I was looking at everything from God's point of view. That's right. Alice snapped her fingers and explained seriously, "At that time, the personality that controlled this body was not you." Then, Gong Fan was even more incredulous. "Could it be you? That's impossible. How could he do that? This is what worries me the most. It's not you, and it can't be you. Then, who was the person controlling that body?" If one thought about it deeply, they could not help but be terrified. Alice could not be sure what had happened in Gong Fan's body. But there was one thing that she could guarantee with her life. The hand holding the knife did not come from Gong Fan. Could it be? Alice suddenly had a very scary thought. She stood up and said to Gong Fan, "Are you willing to believe me this once?" Gong Fan looked up and looked at Alice, only to see that her eyes were filled with determination. "Believe what?" "Believe that I can help you." Alice said solemnly, "But you need to go back to Hurricane with me. By then, I will design a treatment plan. We can't wait any longer." Your condition is not optimistic. You have to be treated and monitored as soon as possible. Go back to Hurricane with you? Yes. But I'm afraid that your mommy won't agree. She has been very worried that I will take you away. Before Alice could finish, Gong Fan said firmly, I'm willing to go back with you. Alice was slightly surprised. You're willing to go back with me? But I have a condition. Gong Fan suddenly stood up and closed his eyes, as if he had finally made his final decision. No matter what happens, no matter if my condition gets better or worse, please, protect you and destroy me, he said the last 3 words through gritted teeth. Alice felt slightly suffocated. She didn't know why Gong Fan made such a decision. She guessed that it was probably for Yu and, more importantly, for Yun Shishir. However, it was hard to imagine how much courage it took for him to make such a decision. A person's survival instinct was very strong. What kind of pressure and courage did Gong Fan have to bear to face death like this? To an ordinary person, the destruction of one's personality was equivalent to death. It wasn't that he didn't want to survive. On the contrary, he wanted to live well. It's good to be alive. Gong Fan said honestly, when you're alive, you can see a lot of beautiful scenery and be with the person you like. However, if one's life is built on the pain of others, then such an existence is meaningless. As he spoke, Gong Fan gradually choked up. He immediately turned his gaze away and narrowed his eyes. He tried his best to force back the tears that were about to burst out of his eyes and clenched his fists. I'll go back with you, but you have to agree to my condition. If I do that, your mommy will never forgive me. Chapter 4294. Gong Fan smiled self-deprecatingly. My existence is a mistake in itself. Since it's a mistake, it's better to end this mistake as soon as possible. After he finished speaking, he looked down helplessly. He had tried his best and struggled before. He had put down his pride and compromised. He had carefully changed and abandoned his pride to please Gong Jia, Mu Yaja, and Hua Jin. He wanted everyone to like him as much as they liked Yu. He had ignored his weak pride just to give everyone a reason to keep him. He had curled up in such a shell and struggled at death's door. Even if it was just for one more day or one more glance, he still wanted to exist in this world. But he had given up. He had really given up. Alice held her forehead helplessly. You want me to become a heinous person? In this way, your mommy will never forgive me. I'll be an executioner who has killed the person she loves the most. Gong Fan gritted his teeth tightly. He had never shown such a weak side in front of anyone before. It was only in front of Alice that he finally couldn't suppress the sadness and disappointment in his heart. Alice knew that whether it was Gong Jia, Mu Yaja, or Xiao Yichen, Gong Fan cared too much about them. Hence, he was never willing to show such a side in front of them easily. On the other hand, she was an outsider, yet he was able to cast aside his burdens. Her heart ached as she walked over and gently hugged his shoulders. She stroked his shoulders that were trembling badly because of his forbearance. If you want to cry, it's okay to cry. If you keep enduring like this, even a body of steel won't be able to take it. Gong Fan didn't say anything. However, Alice could faintly hear a few choked sobs coming out from the gaps between his teeth. The more he endured, the more Alice's heart ached. Luckily, Yun Shishir wasn't here. Otherwise, her heart would definitely be completely broken because of this guy. In the end, Gong Fan didn't cry out loud. He grabbed the corner of Alice's clothes tightly and suppressed his sadness. Promise me, he said in a low voice, I don't want to be a burden to Yu anymore. It's best for everyone if I disappear. Alice pursed her lips with a complicated expression and finally nodded reluctantly. Looks like I'm going to be a vicious woman again. What? You want to take Gong Fan away? Gong Jia stood in front of Alice and refused without thinking. Impossible. He said firmly, I won't let you take him away. Please, you have to understand one thing. It's not that I want to take him away, it's that he wants to follow me. Gong Jia, I don't care. Why don't you go and convince your nephew yourself? Moreover, with his current situation, what good would it do for him to stay by your side? It was like a cancer patient who insisted on staying at home instead of going to the authoritative hospital. Would it work? Do you think keeping him by your side is the best way to protect him? Alice's sharp words made Gong Jie speechless. Chapter 4295. Gong Jie remained silent. Now that Yun Shishir was still unconscious, he couldn't make a decision on his own. He couldn't make the decision to let Alice take Gong Fan away. This was the crux of the problem. He also felt that if Gong Fan could return to Hurricane with Alice, it might be a good choice for Gong Fan. However, he couldn't make a decision. If Yun Shishir wakes up and realizes that Gong Fan isn't around, she will definitely go crazy. Alice was speechless. She held her forehead and said, "Why do I feel that she is the one who can't be independent?" Gong Jie was stunned. Alice said, "Yun Shishir once said that Yu is so dependent on her. In my opinion, she is the one who is more dependent on Yu. Their mother-son relationship has reached a stalemate. Yu is dependent on her because Yun Shishir needs him. On the other hand, Yun Shishir is dependent on her out of guilt and out of motherly love. However, more importantly, she is used to being inseparable from her son and wants to protect him to achieve her own satisfaction. In the end, don't you think that this kind of dependence is very sick? She can protect Yu for a while, but can she protect him forever?" Gong Jie was speechless. She just cares too much. If she cares too much, it will become a kind of sickness. This won't do. If she continues to rely on Yu, then she won't be able to live without him in the future. In the end, whether it is Yu or Xiao Yichen, they are just passers-by in her life. In the end, the person who will be with her and spend the rest of her life with her is not Yu, not Xiao Yichen. It is Mu Yaja. They are husband and wife. Their lives are tied together. Upon hearing this, Gong Jie finally spoke. "I think so too. She is too dependent on Yu and cares too much about him. Whether it is out of a desire to protect him or out of heartache, but this is not a long-term thing." Alice added, "It may not be a good thing for Yu to stay here. First of all, it is disadvantageous to not be able to monitor his physical and mental condition. If he comes back to Hurricane with me, perhaps this situation can be greatly improved." Gong Jie nodded his head in agreement. "Okay, got it. How about this? You and Mu Yaja? If he agrees, you can take him away." "Okay." Alice stood up and said, "Got it." Alice took the initiative to discuss this matter with Mu Yaja. When Mu Yaja heard this, he did not feel as conflicted as Alice had imagined. To him, there was a difference between him and Yun Shishir. Although he loved Yu, he did not rely on him as much as Yun Shishir. On the contrary, Mu Yaja felt that it was a good choice for Yu and Gong Fan to follow Alice back to Hurricane. "You can take him away." Seeing that he actually agreed, Alice was a little surprised. "I thought you would refuse." "Why?" Because you are afraid that she will erase his memory again?" Alice did not comment. "First of all, excluding other factors, you erased his memory because of Gong Xiaoying's order, right? You can't go against him. You can only follow his orders." "Yes." Chapter 4296. Mu Yaja laughed heartily. "If that's the case, what do I have to worry about? However, other than Yu, I have to bring someone with me." "Who?" Mu Yaja looked at her. Alice looked around and her gaze finally fell on Hua Jin. Hua Jin suddenly felt uneasy. Natalia. Hearing this name from Alice, Hua Jin felt inexplicably upset. "Must I bring her with me?" "Yes, I must." Yu's condition was initially stabilizing, but the recent changes in his condition have something to do with Natalia, she answered truthfully. It's hard to disentangle her involvement. "I suspect that. Gong Fan's condition must have something to do with Natalia. So, I have to bring her with me." When Hua Jin heard this, he nodded helplessly. "You can bring her with you, and I can't interfere. However, I have to make one thing clear. Can I go back to Hurricane with you? You want to go back to Hurricane with me? Alice glanced at him speechlessly. That's not a place for you to stay. Why? You won't be used to it. There's nothing to be used to. If I go back with you, I can help to take care of the two little guys. With me around, Shusher will be more at ease. What I mean is, Alice leaned closer to him. Are you sure you want to go back with me? Aren't you afraid of Gong Jie? In other words, he was walking into a demon's den. Hua Jin then realized that Gong Jie came back to Hurricane every 2 to 3 days. If that was the case, Hua Jin might have to face this demon king from time to time. Hua Jin's lips twitched for a long time before he finally braced himself and said, "It's okay. I'm okay." Okay, if that's the case, go back and pack your luggage now. We'll fly back to Hurricane tomorrow morning. All right. Hua Jin immediately took a taxi back to the villa and packed his luggage. At night, Yun Shusher finally heard that the postoperative infection period had passed. She was out of danger and could visit her now. Gong Fan suggested that before he left, he wanted to take a look at his mommy and bid her farewell. However, Xiao Yichen was still worried. Hence, with Mu Yaja's silent approval, Xiao Yichen stood guard outside the ward. Gong Fan knew very well that Xiao Yichen was worried that he would go crazy again, but he wasn't angry at all. After experiencing the scene on the surveillance camera, he knew that he was now a dangerous person. It wasn't unreasonable for Xiao Yichen to be so wary of him. He was already surprised that Xiao Yichen agreed to let Gong Fan into the ward. After Gong Fan entered the ward, Xiao Yichen warned him in a low voice, "I'm warning you, don't play any tricks. Even if I'm so far away from you, I have the ability to take you down in 3 seconds." Gong Fan took a deep breath and suddenly smiled. Got it. Xiao Yichen originally thought that Gong Fan would flare up, but when he saw that he was very calm, he was a little surprised instead. However, he didn't say anything and just leaned against the door, his gaze never leaving Gong Fan's back. Gong Fan walked to the bed and sat down by it. The temperature in the ward was just right. He sat on the chair and quietly looked at Yun Shusher. Chapter 4297. Mu Yaja had told him not to wake her up easily. Now that her wound had just been stitched up, she finally fell asleep after being injected with an analgesic pump. Gong Fan could not bear to wake her up, so he stayed by her side quietly. He gently held her hand and pressed his face against the back of her hand, greedily absorbing the warmth from the back of her hand. He did not know if this was the last time he could hold her hand. Now, every minute and second that passed was extremely precious to him. Why are you packing? Natalia looked at Hua Jin, who was busy packing, and was a little puzzled. Are you going on a long trip? Hua Jin packed his luggage and replied, "It's not me. It's us." Natalia was a little surprised. Us? Are you going somewhere to play? No. Hua Jin did not know how to explain. Natalia was too sensitive. If he said that she needed to go back to Hurricane for treatment because of her body, she would definitely reject it. He remembered that Natalia used to hate anyone who stayed by her side in the name of monitoring her. For example, Alice. Whether it was Natalia or the other person, Generisa, they were extremely uncomfortable. Natalia had said solemnly that she was not a patient. Hua Jin did not know how to explain it. Natalia stared at him. Finally, she sighed. It's because of my body, isn't it? Hua Jin was a little surprised by her sensitivity. She was even more sensitive than he had imagined. Actually, I know that I'm different from ordinary children. Natalia walked to the side a little dejectedly and said sadly, other than not having parents, I also know that my body is different from other children. Professor Romenko once said that there are other personalities living in my body. Hua Jin said, in the past, you hated it when people said that you were sick. Yes, because I feel that I'm not sick. I feel that they have ulterior motives towards me. I hate those people. When Hua Jin heard this, he could not help guessing that the people Natalia was referring to were the doctors and nurses from Michelle Hospital. I hate them, especially staying in that cold place. I feel that they look at me like they're looking at an emotionless corpse. As Natalia spoke, she turned around and looked at Hua Jin with a gentler gaze. But you're different. If you say that I'm sick, then I believe that I'm really sick. You are willing to believe me? Hua Jin looked a little incredulous. Natalia's trust was very weak. From the first time he saw her, especially when she looked at him with an extremely resistant gaze, he knew that this child was very insecure. I know I have a sister. Her name is Natalisa. The professor told me about her. However, I also know that she is not my sister. Her existence is just another me. Hua Jin was a little surprised to hear that. What did the professor tell you? Chapter 4298. At that time, he told you that he was your sister, so you believed him? Yes. But later, I started to have doubts about this story. Why? At that time, a lot of people looked at me like I was a patient. I hated those looks, but gradually, I realized that I was really sick. Sometimes, I would sleep for a long time. When I fell asleep, I would secretly write in my diary. When I woke up, I would find that the calendar had already flipped to the next page. Sometimes, I couldn't even tell if I was in a dream or in reality. I felt like my body had been taken over by another person, and that person was Natalia. After all, Natalia was still a child. Her ability to organize her words was not very good. However, from her words, it was clear that she had many questions about her own body. I actually felt that there was something wrong with my body a long time ago. I even realized that the professor was using me as a test subject. Test subject? Yes. He seemed to be using me as a test subject. Natalia continued, so, when Alice wanted to take me away, I was very against it. Because Alice and the professor were in cahoots. She must have wanted to use me as a test subject. Hua Jin managed to glean a lot of key clues from her words. Wait, you said that you suspected that the professor was using you as a test subject. How did you know? Natalia turned to look at Hua Jin, and her eyes flickered. Hua Jin could tell that she was weighing the pros and cons in her heart. She was weighing whether to believe him or not. Her trust was very weak. She must be fighting in her heart right now whether to believe him or not. He was a little nervous. Just as he suspected that Natalia would not believe him and tell him everything, Natalia sighed. I believe you, so I'll tell you what I know. This is all my secrets. You can't tell anyone else. Okay. Natalia began to talk tirelessly. It turned out that not only Alice and Hua Jin, but even Natalia had discovered the secret on the calendar. She had the habit of keeping a diary. However, unlike other people, she did not like to write in a diary. Her diary was to record the day when she was awake. Sometimes, she would mark it with stickers on the bedside. Other times, she would secretly write down the day's events and the date on the floor under the bed. That was an extremely secluded corner that most people would not be able to find. Later, she concluded that she would sometimes sleep for 3 to 4 days. Whenever she was unconscious, a circle would be used to mark the day. Every day, Romanka would come to her room to look at the calendar. She couldn't help but suspect that the change in her body had something to do with Professor Romanka. On one occasion, Natalia had played a trick on the sly. She took out an identical calendar from the drawer. When she woke up, she secretly changed the calendar and circled the date with a marker. She realized that perhaps there were 2 of her in her body. One was her current self, and the other was something that even she couldn't control. Chapter 4299. Hearing this, Hua Jin could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. He did not expect Natalia to be so shrewd as to tamper with the calendar. If that was the case, during the few days when Alice was monitoring her, did she wake up a few times and mark the calendar not with the real Natalia but Natalia? He did not dare to ask. Once he asked, Natalia would definitely find out that they were monitoring her. Then, Natalia would definitely misunderstand them and have some ulterior motives. That day, after I changed the diary, I went to the balcony to bask in the sun. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the professor entered the room and went to the table to look at the calendar as usual. Then, he walked to the balcony, but he did not call my name. Natalia? Yes. He called me Natalia. When Natalia heard this, her eyes narrowed slightly. I immediately felt that there must be some connection between the professor and Natalia. When Hua Jin heard this, he was a little curious. And then? I pretended to be very calm. He called me Natalia, so I pretended to be Natalia. He said that he wanted to continue the lesson from last time, so I followed him to a laboratory. In that laboratory, another strange man appeared, and he taught me some very strange things. What things? Hypnotism? Natalia raised her eyebrows in confusion. I don't think I remember this term wrongly. I think it was hypnotism. Was that man holding a crystal ball? When Natalia heard this, she shook her head. No. If it wasn't, then what was it? Do you know the metronome used when playing the piano? Yes. A metronome. Did he only use a metronome? No, there was also a clock. A clock? Yes. Natalia continued, he began to teach me how to do experiments. I remember that he summoned an assistant to his side and began to demonstrate to me what hypnotism was. He first used a pacemaker and placed it in front of his assistant. Then, he gave a long lecture. After a few minutes, the assistant was obviously sleepy, so he gently moved the needle. Then the assistant fainted? No, his eyes widened even more. Hua Jin was taken aback. Wasn't it hypnosis? Why was it different from what he had imagined? The assistant's eyes widened. Then, the man began to interrogate him about what had happened in the past 2 days. The man then told him that what had happened 2 days ago was just a dream and that he had to count down to 3 seconds so that he could forget it. Then, he began to count down. When he reached the end, he snapped his fingers, and that person went limp and fainted. Hua Jin sighed. So, the real hypnotism is like this? I don't remember the details. That day, I also felt muddle-headed and scared. I was afraid that my identity would be exposed. Actually, I wasn't sure if the professor really believed that I was Natalia. I kept feeling that my performance was very bad. I was afraid that he would recognize me, so I was very careful. And then? I attended classes for a day. Chapter 4300. I keep feeling that the professor's attitude towards me that day was very strange. In the past, he was very gentle to me, but towards Natalia, he was condescending, as if he was the ruler. It was as if he was the one who created Natalia. Hua Jin understood. Natalia might not know, but Hua Jin knew. He heard from Alice that it was Professor Romenka who had created the second personality in Natalia's body. No wonder it was like that. Natalia said, Professor Romenka was very fierce, and his attitude towards me was different from before. Anyway, it felt quite strange. As she said that, she subconsciously shrank her shoulders. Obviously, she still had a lingering fear when she thought of Romenka's serious and terrifying look that day. Hua Jin hugged her, his heart aching. All right, don't be afraid. I'll protect you in the future. I won't let you get hurt again. Natalia nodded gently and hugged him. Now, I'm going to bring you back to Hurricane. Are you willing? Hua Jin immediately raised his hand and swore, I will never hurt you. I will protect you with my life. Pfft. Before Hua Jin could finish swearing, Natalia burst out laughing. Why did you have to swear like that? It's just like those male and female leads in TV dramas who swear eternal love. Hua Jin was so embarrassed that the corners of his lips twitched. Natalia said again, don't worry. Since I'm willing to go back to Hurricane with you, I won't suspect you anymore. Hua Jin finished packing his luggage. Alice called to say that the private jet would be parked at the tarmac of Huashan Airport. They had agreed to meet there. Mu Yaja also ordered someone to pack his luggage. After the butler brought the luggage to the hospital, Gong Fan was still in the ward, guarding Yun Shishir closely. Gong Jia walked to the door of the ward and gently knocked on the door. It's time to go. The plane will come to pick you up in half an hour. Gong Fan heard it, but he acted as if he didn't hear it. He continued to sit in front of the hospital bed, but he clung onto the back of Yun Shishir's hand even more greedily. Perhaps she didn't feel anything before, but now, when Gong Jia mentioned leaving, the sadness of parting grew in her heart. Mommy, I'm sorry. He gripped her hand tightly in frustration, tears of sadness falling from his eyes. Xiao Yichen was stunned when he saw this. He rarely saw Gong Fan cry. In his heart, Gong Fan was an extremely stubborn person. No matter what he encountered, he would rarely shed tears. It could be said that this was the first time he had seen his tears. Seeing his tears, Xiao Yichen's heart softened. He walked over and gently placed his hand on Gong Fan's shoulder. His tone also became gentler. Stop crying. He couldn't bear to see Gong Fan cry. Gong Fan looked up and finally stood up. He said seriously, please take good care of Mommy when I'm not around. You don't have to say this. I'll definitely take good care of Mommy. This is my mission. Gong Fan took a deep breath and turned around. He still looked down at Yun Shishir reluctantly. He lowered his head and gently kissed her forehead. Mommy, I'm leaving. He lowered his voice and was about to leave when he saw a drop of tear fall from the corner of Yun Shishir's eye. Chapter 43:01. Gong Fan's heart ached even more when he saw this. He didn't know why Yun Shishir was still crying in someone's sleep. Could it be that she could hear his voice even when she was unconscious? Gong Fan was a little reluctant, so he said, Mommy, don't worry. Wait for me to come home, okay? Gong Jia pursed his lips. He couldn't bear to see such a scene and didn't dare to look anymore. He raised his wrist and looked at the time. Seeing that it was getting late, he immediately said, Let's go, don't waste any more time. It's not like we're parting forever. Gong Fan gritted his teeth and steeled his heart. He didn't look at Yun Shishir again and almost rushed out of the door. Just as he walked out of the ward, Lisa arrived in time. She had just rushed to the hospital and saw that Gong Fan's eyes were red. She frowned and didn't know what had happened. On the way here, she only vaguely understood what had happened from the butler and Mu Yaja over the phone, but it wasn't in detail. How could she not believe that Gong Fan would stab Yun Shishir with a knife personally? There must be some misunderstanding. What's going on? When Gong Jia saw Lisa, he didn't have time to explain anything. He lowered his voice and said, Gong Fan's condition has worsened. Alice suggested that we bring him and Natalia back to Hurricane for treatment. Back to Hurricane? When Lisa heard this, she immediately walked in front of Gong Fan and said to him, I'll go back with you. What? When Xiao Yichen saw this, he immediately walked out of the ward. You want to go back to the ward with him? Yes. I'm his bodyguard. I want to protect him. What danger can there be in going back to Hurricane? Xiao Yichen didn't think much of it. When Lisa heard this, she immediately said, If I had stayed by Gong Fan's side all the time, this wouldn't have happened. When Xiao Yichen heard this, he was speechless. He didn't want Lisa to go back with Gong Fan. After all, Gong Fan was now a dangerous person. If Lisa did not leave his side at all, she might be in danger. Lisa and Yun Shishir were the same. They were absolutely close to Yu and Gong Fan. They even trusted them blindly. But, the more they had such an attitude, the more dangerous it was. Lisa turned her head and looked deeply at Xiao Yichen. So, are you suspecting that Gong Fan is behind this? Xiao Yichen froze for a moment. The hesitation in his eyes infuriated Lisa. Bastard. Her face was ashen as she clenched her fists and punched him in the face. He's your younger brother. It's fine if others don't believe him, but you can't not believe him. How dare you suspect your own brother, Xiao Yichen? You've gone too far. Xiao Yichen took a few steps back and touched his cheek gently. However, his face turned pale when he heard Lisa's words. He was silently regretting that he had spoken too harshly to Gong Fan. Now that Lisa's words were like pearls, he regretted it even more. I'm sorry, you don't have to apologize to me. You should be apologizing to Gong Fan. As Lisa spoke, she walked to Gong Fan's side and grabbed his hand. Let's go. Before Gong Fan could understand what was going on, he was led away by Lisa. Gong Fan was confused and asked, "What are you doing?" "I'm going back to Hurricane with you." Gong Fan sighed and said, "You're too rash. This has nothing to do with him." Chapter 4302. I'll go with you. No matter what, I have to protect your safety. Although Yu had told her that they didn't have to address each other as master and servant from now on, in Lisa's heart, if Gong Fan and Yu's lives were in danger, she would definitely sacrifice her life. When Gong Fan heard this, he was unwilling. "You don't have to go back with me. You can just stay here." "No." Lisa said firmly, "I want to go back with you. No matter what, from now on, I will never leave your side." For some reason, Xiao Chen, who was standing at the side, felt a little upset when he heard this. He said to Gong Fan, "If she wants to go back with you, then let her guard you. Otherwise, she won't be at ease even if she stays here." When Gong Fan heard this, he couldn't refute, so he nodded lightly. Huashan Airport. Hurricane's private jet was already parked on the tarmac. Gong Jia had already arrived with Gong Fan and Lisa. Originally, Mu Yaja also wanted to come, but Gong Jia asked him to stay in the hospital to guard Yun Shishir. If he really couldn't bear to part with Yun Shishir, they could fly to Hurricane together to visit her after Yun Shishir recovered. Only then did Mu Yaja agree. Before leaving, he pulled Gong Fan to the side and squatted in front of him. He asked with some heartache, "Will you hate Daddy?" Gong Fan was puzzled and tilted his head slightly. "Why should I hate you?" Because you don't trust me? Because you want me to be brought back to Hurricane?" "Daddy," Gong Fan hugged him gently. Mu Yaja was a little surprised. It was extremely rare for Gong Fan to take the initiative to hug him. "There's something I've never said to you." As Gong Fan spoke, his gaze was a little lonely. He didn't know if he would have the chance to say it after this farewell. Therefore, he had to take this last chance to confess to him. "Daddy, I love you." When Mu Yaja heard this, his heart was filled with emotions. He could not help but hug Gong Fan tightly, unwilling to let go for a long time. At the same time, Hua Jin brought Natalia to the airport and successfully met up with Gong Jia. Seeing Gong Jia, Hua Jin was a little suspicious. "Are you coming back to Hurricane with us?" "What is it?" Gong Jia raised his eyebrows. "Do you have any objections? Can I have an opinion? Do you dare to object?" "I wouldn't dare." Gong Jia said, "Without me, the plane can't directly park at Hurricane's private tarmac." "Isn't Alice here?" "Only Gong Xiaoying and I have the right to land on Hurricane's private tarmac." When Hua Jin heard this, he had nothing else to say. The group boarded the plane successfully. Soon, the flight route was approved. The plane took off on time. On the plane, Lisa sat next to Gong Fan. Before boarding the plane, Alice secretly handed her a pair of handcuffs and told her to take action immediately if she found anything wrong with Gong Fan. Lisa did not understand at first, but Alice said seriously, "Now, I suspect that there might be another personality in Gong Fan's body. This personality is not Gong Fan, nor is it Yu. It's definitely a dangerous personality. Since you're going back with him, you have to be vigilant at all times. You can't sleep on the plane until we land. You have to watch over him, understand?" "Understood." Chapter 4303. I got it. Don't worry, I'll be vigilant at all times. It was a full 10 hours from the capital to Hurricane's flight. And in these 10 hours, no matter how tired Lisa was, she couldn't fall asleep. Alice and Gong Jia went to the restaurant to drink a bottle of dry red wine. Gong Jia was fine, but Alice was tipsy after drinking a few glasses of dry red wine. "I'm going to sleep for a while. What about you?" "You go and rest first. I'll stay here." I'm worried that Lisa can't handle Gong Fan alone. In his seat, Gong Fan drank a glass of fruit juice. He held his head and stared out of the window in a daze. A private jet was different from ordinary civil aviation. It was very spacious. The plane was very big to begin with, and the internal structure was extremely luxurious. The layout was divided into a dining room, a guest room, a living room, and a movie theater. Alice returned to the living room, while Gong Jia, Gong Fan, and Lisa sat in the guest room. The guest room had a solid wood wine cabinet and a small bar counter. Under their feet was an expensive Saxon carpet and an expensive sofa. One look and one could tell that it was expensive. Lisa saw that Gong Fan was staring out of the window in a daze and said carefully, "Aren't you sleepy? If you feel tired, you can sleep for a while." "I don't want to sleep." "Why don't you want to sleep?" "I feel that you're very tired." Gong Fan finally turned to look at her. "I don't dare to sleep." "Why?" "I'm afraid that if I fall asleep, I won't be able to wake up again." Lisa smiled and said helplessly, "Why do you think so?" "No matter what, don't be so negative about things. Everything will be fine when we return to Hurricane." "How can I believe that everything will be fine just because we're back in Hurricane?" As Gong Fan said this, he lowered his head and looked at his hands numbly. "Even I can't control my own body. How can I believe that others can control me?" Lisa was stunned and suddenly was speechless. She was silent for a long time before she said seriously, "Although that's true, I believe that everything will be fine." "I hope so." Alice walked out of the living room and saw Lisa and Gong Jia sitting together. She suddenly walked over to Gong Jia and asked quietly, "Why do I feel that Lisa is especially important to Gong Fan?" Gong Jia glanced at her coldly and asked suspiciously, "What are you trying to say?" "I'm just asking you if you feel that way." "Yes." "Then, do you still feel that Xiao Yichen cares a lot about Lisa?" Gong Jia immediately understood what she was gossiping about. Hasn't Xiao Yichen always been interested in Lisa? "Look, Xiao Yichen likes Lisa, but Lisa likes you." "Oh, no, Gong Fan. No matter how I look at it, it looks like a love triangle." Alice said worriedly, looking at it this way, "When they grow up, will it develop into a love triangle?" Gong Jia smiled. "Then you definitely can't tell that Yu cares a lot about Natalia." "Ah, I can tell." Back then, when Yu insisted that Gong Jia adopt Natalia, she saw through the secret behind it. "Why do you think Yu cares so much about Natalia?" "Because she's pretty." Gong Jia thought about it and could only think of this possibility. I've lost all hope in this world that only cares about looks." "Then you should have lost hope long ago." Chapter 4304. In this world, one's looks were everything. In this world, one's looks were everything. One's looks were absolute justice. Alice began to count on her fingers again. "You said that Xiao Yichen likes you." "Oh, no, he likes Lisa." "This Lisa likes you." "That's not right either." "She likes Gong Fan." "Anyway, she likes you and Gong Fan." "This Yu likes Natalia." "Anyway, the relationship between these children is really hard to cut." Gong Jia glanced at her meaningfully. Alice was still slow to realize. "Why are you looking at me like that?" "It's true that it's hard to cut. If you haven't learned Chinese literature well, don't show off so casually." Alice, also, the corners of Gong Jia's lips twitched as he smiled helplessly. "Why are you more worried than their biological mother? This is called treating them as one's own." Alice said seriously, "Although I'm not their biological mother, doesn't this mean that I'm completely treating them as my own?" She looked as if it was natural for her to treat these 4 clowns as her biological children. She looked like a proud mother. Even Gong Jia could not help but laugh when he heard this. "Then you're really productive." "Productive? What's that?" Alice was still a little confused. It was only when she saw Gong Jia's teasing gaze that she understood. "Who are you calling an old sow?" "I'm not talking about you. It's someone who can't wait to take the blame." "You, Alice clenched her fists in anger and glared at Gong Jie. All right, I was wrong. It was rare for him to admit his mistake, so Alice did not want to stoop to his level. She smiled and said, "Don't look down on kids these days. They start to fall in love at a young age, but I don't think this is puppy love. Actually, in ancient China, Xiao Yichen and Yu would have married and had children when they were older." Gong Jie, however, disagreed. "I think you guys are overcomplicating the relationship between children." Ugh, Gong Jie flicked his head. "All right, don't worry so much. Aren't you sleepy? Go to bed early. When I wake up, I'll be at my destination." "Oh, what about you? Don't you want to rest?" "I'm worried, unless I'm really tired." Alice disagreed. "What are you worried about?" "Lisa will take good care of Gong Fan. If anything happens, I'll ask her to inform me immediately. You don't have to worry too much. You should rest early too." Okay. Gong Jie agreed verbally. However, when Alice returned to the room, he was still sitting in his seat, deep in thought. He did not know what he was thinking, but his mind was a mess. It was as if it was filled with thoughts, but he did not know what he was thinking about. He only felt that his head was very heavy, and he did not know what exactly he was thinking about. He was just inexplicably anxious. He did not know what exactly he was anxious about. Gong Jie poured himself a glass of red wine in frustration and leaned lazily on the sofa. Gong Fan finally could not hold on any longer. He leaned on the sofa and unknowingly closed his eyes gently. Chapter 43:05. Lisa saw that he finally couldn't resist his sleepiness and fell asleep, so she took a blanket from the side and gently covered him with it. At this moment, Alice happened to walk over. Seeing that Gong Fan had fallen asleep, she turned to look at Lisa and asked with concern, "Are you sleepy?" "I'm not sleepy." "You still say you're not sleepy." "I think you look a little sleepy." Lisa smiled. "No matter how sleepy I am, I'll guard him. Don't worry. I'm not worried about that. I'm afraid that you'll be too tired. But there's no other way. Because this is a special period, only you can control him." After a pause, Alice said with heartache, "It's been hard on you, Lisa." Lisa shook her head. "It's not hard at all. I'm the one who volunteered to stay by his side, take care of him, and protect him. Why would I feel that it's hard?" "All right." Alice said again, "How about I make you a cup of coffee?" Lisa nodded. After a while, Alice brought a cup of coffee over. Lisa took a sip. Even though she felt that it was bitter, she forced herself to drink it. At night, the lights in the cabin were switched off, leaving only a wall lamp lit in the living room. Gong Fan was lying on the sofa, sleeping soundly with the blanket wrapped around him. Lisa sat at the side. She just sat there, but she was bored to death. The 10-hour flight was very boring and long. But she had to be vigilant at all times and not be negligent. Gong Fan was a dangerous person. Without a doubt, Alice suspected that there was another dangerous personality residing in his body. She believed it. After all, she was unwilling to believe that the real Gong Fan and Yu would be so heartless as to kill Yun Shishir at all costs. As for what kind of physical condition it was, everything would have to wait until they returned to Hurricane before they could come to a conclusion. Alice felt that this matter was very tricky. It was because of Yu and Gong Fan that she braced herself and decided to study this field. Otherwise, she wouldn't have bothered to pay attention to the field of multiple personality disorder. The world of dual personality and multiple personality disorder was full of unimaginable fantasy. Even so, she didn't seem to be very interested. However, because it was Yu, be it for Yun Shishir or Gong Jie, he had to be more careful. Alice went back to her room. She first contacted several colleagues in the psychiatry department of the medical center before going to sleep. At the same time, in the hospital, Yun Shishir woke up after the effects of the medicine wore off. As soon as she woke up, Xiao Yichen, who had been guarding her, immediately stood up nervously. "Mommy, you're awake?" He walked up to her worriedly and carefully held her hand. He tried to sound as calm as possible. How is it? Does the wound still hurt? Where's Yu? Her first sentence was very difficult, but she still managed to squeeze out a few vague syllables. After the painkiller pump's effects wore off, the wound started to hurt faintly. However, she gritted her teeth and endured it. Xiao Yichen's expression froze when he heard this. Where's Gong Fan? Yun Shishir looked troubled and uneasy as Xiao Yichen looked uneasy. Where is he? As she said this, she tried to sit up on the bed. When she moved just now, her wound was affected and she grimaced in pain.